Chapter 1, Parting 3 Years Ago. Saying Goodbye to Happiness. The book is authorized by Mai Xiang Fong and produced and published electronically by Zhang Yuke Ji. In the noisy waiting room, a girl dressed in a pristine white chiffon dress tightly held the hand of the young man across from her. "Ethan, do you really have to go? We've just graduated, and now we have to part ways. I always dreamed that after graduation, we would rent a small house in this city, go to work together, shop for groceries after work, and then head home where you'd wash the vegetables, and I'd cook. But now that you're leaving, all my dreams are shattered." His fair face, with distinct features and deep black eyes full of love, gazed at her. "Helen, 3 years, just 3 years. Wait for me to come back." If it weren't for escaping his father's arrangements, he wouldn't have chosen this path of enlisting, nor would he have had to part from her. Ethan Young looked at Helen Drew with deep reluctance, wanting to imprint her image in his heart. Helen's long lashes trembled slightly, and Ethan's heart ached as he softly said, "Helen, our separation is only temporary. Believe in me. 3 years later, we'll be together forever." 3 years would be enough for his father to understand his determination, and enough time for his mother to persuade him. "Ethan, why does it have to be 3 years? 3 years, a time so long that within it, she would have to struggle alone in this unfamiliar city while enduring the pain of missing him." Ethan Young tightly held Helen Drew's hands, his heart aching as he looked at her. "Helen, I'm sorry for leaving you to live here alone, to wait for me on your own. If you want to go back to our hometown or to the city where we first met, I'll come to get you in 3 years." This city had always been their dream during college, a place where they hoped to build their careers and own a home together. Helen Drew shook her head, forcing a bitter smile. "During college, we dreamed of graduating and living in this city. I'll stay here and wait for you." To return to that cold house, to a place devoid of warmth, she didn't want to see her father being gentle with that other woman every day, nor endure the smug look of that woman directed at her. "Attention, passengers. Attention, passengers. The train is about to depart. Passengers who have not yet boarded, please do so promptly." Hearing the announcement, Helen Drew felt even more distressed. She tightly embraced Ethan Young. "Ethan, come back soon. I'll be here waiting for you. I'll be here waiting for you to return." Ethan Young held Helen Drew tightly, then finally clenched his teeth and pushed her away with resolve. "Helen, I'm leaving now." With that, he stepped toward the ticket gate without hesitation, his right hand carrying his luggage while his left hand formed a tight fist, reminding himself not to turn back. If he turned back and saw the tears in Helen's eyes, he would falter and change his decision. "Ethan! Ethan!" Helen Drew stood frozen, watching Ethan Young walk through the ticket gate until his figure disappeared entirely. She remained rooted in place, staring in the direction he had left. "Ethan! Ethan! Ethan!" Her heart felt empty. Just a month ago, when she and Ethan had graduated, they had packed their belongings and arrived in this city together. She never imagined that in such a short time, he would leave her behind, leaving her to face this unfamiliar place all alone. Amid the stifling summer heat, Helen Drew felt an unexpected chill in her heart. She hugged herself tightly, turned around, and slowly walked out of the noisy waiting room. Chapter 2, Longing is a Form of Torment. "Ethan, you've been away from me for 10 days now, and I miss you so much. Ethan, on the 3rd day after you left, I went to apply for a job at the Carter Corporation. Ethan, do you know? It all felt like a dream. The Carter Corporation actually hired me, and not just that, they made me the secretary to the CEO. On my first day at work, I was so nervous, wondering if the CEO would be strict or cold toward me. But when I finally met him, I was completely stunned. It turns out, he's the man I told you about, the one who helped me at the restaurant. Ethan, it's been a month since you left. What are you doing now? Are you standing at attention or marching? I don't know if it's fate smiling on me, but this past month has gone so smoothly. Work has been great, and I've gotten along well with my colleagues. During this time, Mom has called me several times, asking me to come home. She doesn't want to see me working so hard. But honestly, I don't feel like it's hard at all. It feels meaningful. Every day at work, I learn so much, and after work, I cook dinner, browse social media, and sometimes go out to eat or shop with colleagues. Everything is simple, but I really enjoy this life. Ethan, I truly hope you'll come back soon, so you can be by my side. Every day. Helen Drew set down her pen, a faint smile forming on her lips. Ethan, I want to record my feelings every day, so when you return from the military, you'll see how deeply I've missed you. Ethan, it's been 2 months since you left me. We've never been apart this long before. 4 years ago, we met in college, and until graduation, we were never separated for long. Ethan, I don't understand why you chose to leave, why you chose to enlist. Once you left, it meant 3 years apart. 3 years, did you think about that back then? Did you think about how I'd have to live alone for 3 years, facing all the difficulties by myself? In this unfamiliar place, the only person I could rely on was you. But why did you abandon me? A clear tear rolled down from the corner of her eye, trailing along her cheek before falling onto the diary page, breaking into tiny droplets across the densely written words. Helen Drew tilted her head back to look at the chandelier on the ceiling, her red lips parting slightly. Ethan, I can't hold on anymore. I just can't. Every evening after work, I squeeze onto a crowded bus alone, come home, cook dinner by myself, and sit at the dining table eating slowly, all alone. Do you know? This isn't enjoyment anymore, it's torment. So many times, I've wanted to give up, to go back home. But I don't want to return to that house, nor do I want to live a life that's already been planned out for me. Helen Drew closed her diary, raising her right hand to wipe away the tears at the corner of her eyes. She stood up, a faint, sorrowful smile tugging at her lips as she slowly walked towards the bathroom. In the mirror appeared a figure dressed in pale pink pajamas, her wine-red curly hair hastily clipped up, with a few strands falling messily around her cheeks. Her eye sockets were red, her small, cherry-like lips pressed stubbornly together, and her alluring eyes carried a deep-seated resentment. Helen Drew stood frozen in front of the mirror, unable to believe that the person reflected back at her was herself. She grabbed a tube of toothpaste and hurled it forcefully at the mirror. No, this wasn't her, someone as elegant and noble as her couldn't have fallen to such a state. No, it was impossible. Crash. The mirror shattered into pieces. Helen Drew, still barefoot, stood in the bathroom, staring blankly at the fragments before her. Suddenly, she let out a cold laugh. Ethan, I hate you. I hate you. Ethan, for the past 2 months, you haven't written me a single letter, sent me a single message, let alone made a phone call. Do you even know? The night before last, I almost died. At that moment, the person I wished would appear by my side was you. The person I wanted to shield me was you. But all of that was just my wishful thinking. The one who appeared before me then was the president. Thud thud, jingle jingle, la la la. The distinctive ringtone of Helen Drew's phone echoed from the living room, and her heart tightened. Years ago, Ethan had stayed up 3 nights to compose this ringtone, a melody made just for the two of them. Now. Helen Drew bit her lip, looking at the shattered mirror, silently telling herself that Ethan hadn't given her a reason, only asking her to wait for him for 3 years. 3 years later, perhaps she would receive the answer she longed for. Barefoot, Helen Drew walked out to the living room, picked up the phone from the sofa, and saw the words, President, displayed on the screen. A flicker of surprise flashed in her eyes. Chapter 3, The Woman on the Poster. The afternoon sunlight slanted, casting its glow on the wedding studio poster of A Lifetime. The woman in the poster beamed with a radiant smile like a blooming flower, her alluring eyes filled with a deep, captivating gaze looking forward. The dimples on her cheeks drew the attention of every passerby. A light purple wedding dress accentuated her graceful and flawless figure. Her hair, styled in an elegant updo, added an air of nobility. Her slender, fair right hand gently rested on her right shoulder, exuding a calm and refined demeanor, leaving people wondering who this rising model might be. The cicadas chirped incessantly on the tree branches. A young man in sportswear, with a black backpack slung over his right shoulder, stepped out of the bustling train station. He tilted his head slightly to glance at the sun, his eyes narrowing slightly as the corners of his thin lips curved upward. "Helen, I'm back. 3 years, back then, you saw me off at this very place. The pain, like a knife cutting into my heart, remains as vivid as ever. My fingertips still seem to carry the warmth of your teardrops. Ethan, come home, son. Over the past 3 years, your father has come to terms with everything. He won't decide your future anymore. Whatever path you wish to take, we'll support you, as long as you stay by our side." Ethan Young was just about to step out of the station when his phone buzzed incessantly in his pocket. Seeing the word "Mom" displayed on the screen, his eyes turned cold. However, after a moment's thought, he decided to answer. A smile appeared on Ethan Young's resolute face. "Mom, I know Dad's compromise this time is thanks to your persuasion. But I'm not ready to come home yet. Let me finish what I need to do first, and then I'll return. Helen, I want to tell you everything. I want to bring you home, to tell my parents that you are my choice, my lifelong decision." A gentle sigh came from the other end of the line. "Ethan, we've waited 3 years for you. Waiting a little longer won't hurt. Just don't make us wait too long." "Mom, thank you. During my years in the military, to ensure everyone could focus on training, our phones were confiscated. Only after discharge were they returned. As for the letters, they've always stayed in my backpack, unopened. These letters brimming with longing, I want to be by Helen's side, holding her, as I read every word she wrote to me. Ethan, your father's birthday is in 3 months. If possible, try to come home by then, okay?" Ethan Young tightly gripped his phone and nodded firmly. "Mom, I understand. Dad, on your birthday, I want to give you a surprise. I want you to know that the son you've always worried about has grown up. The path I've chosen is even better than the one you planned for me back then." A faint smile appeared on Ethan Young's lips. This city had brought him so much hope. After graduating, he and Helen had come to this city, hoping to carve out a place of their own. Now, he was about to achieve his dream. "Helen, I'm back." As soon as he stepped out of the train station, Ethan Young immediately noticed a giant billboard across the street. The woman on the billboard, wasn't that Helen Drew, the person he had been longing for day and night? Helen, why was she wearing a light purple wedding dress? Helen Drew, could it be that in just 3 years, you've already changed your heart? Did our 4 years of love mean nothing compared to 3 years apart? Ethan Young bit his lip, his eyes narrowing as he stared intently at Helen Drew's radiant smile on the billboard. When he noticed the hotline number and address at the bottom of the billboard, his lips curved into a faint smile. "Helen, so you've become a model," he murmured. Though he said this, unease began to stir in his heart. Ethan Young tried to suppress the unease building within him and turned toward the taxi parked nearby. "Helen, will you be surprised to see me back? Helen, what are you doing right now? Are you at home putting on a face mask? Or perhaps reading a book?" Chapter 4, Love at the Moment. "Helen, your mother asked you to come home with me tonight." Helen Drew was buried in arranging documents when she heard a gentle voice above her head. Helen Drew lifted her head from the stack of files, offering a faint smile. "President Carter, I understand." As soon as she finished speaking, a blush spread across Helen Drew's cheeks. Her gentle eyes, like flowing water, gazed at the man in front of her with deep affection. This man, 3 years ago, when she first joined the company, she had never dreamed he would take an interest in her, let alone imagine that one day she would marry him. Hello, I'm Helen Drew. 3 years ago, she entered this company carrying the longing for Ethan Young. When Ethan Young left, she had promised him she would wait for his return. 3 years, a simple number, yet how many days and nights of yearning did those 3 years comprise? Ethan Young had departed, breaking the promise he made back then, leaving this city on his own. He had failed this city, but she could not. She wanted to establish herself here, to prove to her parents that even without their support, she could rise to the highest position through her own ability. Helen Drew lowered her head, respectfully addressing the president of the Carter Corporation seated at the desk. Unexpectedly, 20 seconds passed without a response. Helen Drew bit her lip, pondering for a moment before lifting her head to meet the gaze of the president of the Carter Corporation. It was him. Helen Drew's eyes widened in disbelief. He was the man who had helped her at the restaurant that day, the one she had always wanted to thank but never had the chance to. Quickly regaining her composure, Helen Drew smiled at the president of the Carter Corporation, who was engrossed in reviewing documents, and spoke again. Hello, sir, I'm Helen Drew. Lucas Carter furrowed his brows, placing his fountain pen down. He was about to reprimand the person before him when he suddenly noticed a delicate face. It was her. The woman from the restaurant that day. Helen Drew. A glimmer of light flashed in Lucas Carter's eyes, and a faint smile appeared at the corner of his lips. He nodded politely. Are you the new secretary? It seemed the people under his command were quite efficient. Just 2 days ago, he had mentioned needing a secretary, and today, they had already found one. Yes. Helen Drew's enchanting eyes sparkled with a smile. President, what should I do now? Seeing that the president seemed very approachable, the coming days likely wouldn't be too difficult. Ethan, I will work hard at the Carter Corporation. I want to wait for your return. I want to show you that without you, I can still live well. Helen, what are you thinking about? Lucas Carter noticed Helen Drew zoning out while looking at him, her lips carrying a faint smile, and couldn't help but ask. Helen Drew snapped back to reality and awkwardly replied, Nothing, President. After work, I'll change my clothes and head to your house to meet your mother. What's wrong with me? Why am I thinking about what happened 3 years ago again? 3 years have passed, Ethan must be coming back soon. I wonder if he received the breakup letter I sent him. I sent him so many letters, yet not a single reply. Lucas Carter smiled indulgently and said, I've told you already, when no one's around, just call me Lucas. Besides, we're about to get engaged. Soon, everyone in the company will know, so there's no need to hide it anymore. Lucas Carter dangled the car keys in his hand. I'm heading out to meet a client now, and later, I'll come by your house to pick you up. With that, he turned and strode away. Helen Drew smiled happily, nodding as she watched Lucas Carter's figure disappear. For a fleeting moment, Ethan Young's image appeared before her eyes. Helen Drew shook her head, trying to remind herself that Ethan Young no longer had anything to do with her. He was the past, and Lucas was her future. Helen Drew tightened her grip on the file in her hands, bowed her head, and continued working, determined not to let herself think about Ethan Young anymore. Chapter 5, The Milk Tea I Love Most. Master, please drop me off up ahead, Ethan Young said hurriedly as he recognized the familiar street. Right at this intersection, please. He remembered there was a bubble tea shop around the corner, one where Helen loved the strawberry milk tea with extra tapioca pearls. A warm smile appeared on Ethan Young's face as he opened the car door and walked toward the shop. The scorching sunlight seemed to bake the ground, and as he walked, his t-shirt was already soaked with sweat. Yet, thinking about seeing Helen Drew soon, the longing of 3 years about to turn into a heartfelt embrace, Ethan felt that this heat was nothing. As long as he could buy the milk tea Helen loved, everything would be worth it. Passing through the familiar street, memories of their happiest moments together flooded his mind. He vividly remembered 3 years ago when they walked hand in hand down this very street, dreaming about their future together. They smiled at each other as if it had all happened just yesterday. 3 years had flown by in the blink of an eye. Helen, when you walked this street alone, did you think of me the way I thought of you? Sir, what kind of milk tea would you like? The sweet voice of the staff greeted Ethan Young as soon as he stepped into the cool bubble tea shop. Strawberry milk tea, with extra tapioca pearls, please, Ethan replied without hesitation. The staff member's heart skipped a beat as she saw Ethan Young walk through the door. She had never seen a man so attractive before. Even in his simple, casual attire, his commanding presence was undeniable. She had summoned all her courage to make her voice sound as sweet as possible, only to find that he didn't even bother to look up. Sir, please take a seat at that table first. She let out a soft sigh, her small face blushing as she spoke shyly. Ethan Young looked up, gave the staff member a gentle smile, and walked toward the chair nearby. Wow, so this is how captivating a handsome man's smile can be. That's right, he just said he wanted more tapioca pearls, didn't he? Alright then, I'll add a few extra scoops. Hopefully, he'll come here every day from now on. Ha, ha. Ethan Young sat by the window, gazing at the apartment building across the street. The corners of his lips curled slightly. Helen, I'm back. Are you so happy that you're at a loss for words? Do you feel like rushing over to embrace me? Do you know? At this very moment, I want nothing more than to run to you, hold you tight, and tell you how much I've missed you all these years. Wait for me to bring home your favorite bubble tea. Sir, your bubble tea is ready. The quick-handed staff member tied the bag and handed it to Ethan Young, her blushing face adorned with a smile. Thank you. Ethan Young took the tea with his slender hands, his other hand carrying a backpack, and walked out of the bubble tea shop without looking back. In the quiet tea shop, the staff member covered her face, staring blankly at Ethan Young's retreating figure. So cool. Ethan Young just stepped out of the bubble tea shop, the heat hit his face, making his whole body sink into a sense of unease and restlessness. Clutching the bubble tea bag tightly in his hand, he strode toward the apartment complex across the street. This feeling of unease had started when he left the train station and saw Helen Drew's picture on the photography studio's advertisement. It had been haunting him ever since. Helen, I hope it's just my overthinking. I know you only went for an artistic photo shoot, and the studio owner just wanted to use your photo for advertising, right? That must be it, that must be it. Ethan Young muttered to himself, his handsome face cold and distant, a flicker of unease in his eyes as he stepped into the apartment complex. Chapter 6, Reunion After Separation. Helen, when are you planning to come home? Helen Drew had just stepped out of her office when the phone in her pocket started ringing loudly. As soon as she answered, her mother's concerned voice came through from the other end. Helen Drew's eyes turned red. It had been 3 years since Ethan Young left her to join the military, while she became an ordinary employee at a company. Her parents had witnessed all the struggles and setbacks she faced over those 3 years. Every time she encountered difficulties, she understood her mother's care and her father's heartache. But she couldn't just go home like that, she couldn't let her father down, nor did she want to live the life they had planned for her. She wanted to choose her own path. Mom, soon. Mom, I can't tell you yet because this is a secret. I've specially asked Lucas Carter to block all the news. I know that once it gets out, you and Dad won't be able to resist coming to find me, and you'll probably want to meet your future son-in-law too. Thinking about the engagement photo taken earlier, Helen Drew's cheeks flushed. A faint sigh came from the other end of the line. Helen, come home soon. Your dad and I miss you. Mom, I know. Helen Drew flagged down a taxi. Mom, I have something to do right now. Let's talk tonight. This afternoon, she had taken a special leave to go home and prepare herself. Looking at the dress she was wearing, it was still last year's style. To make a good impression on Lucas Carter's parents tonight, she planned to rummage through her wardrobe this afternoon. Helen Drew hung up the phone. Sitting in the taxi, she gazed out at the scenery outside the window, a faint smile forming on her lips. Lucas will definitely be happy. Helen. Standing in front of the small house that used to belong to both of them, Ethan Young raised his trembling right hand and gently knocked on the door. Helen, I'm back. I've returned. 5 minutes passed, but the door remained shut. Disappointed, Ethan Young leaned against the wall. Helen, where have you gone? Why aren't you home? Are you at work? I tried calling you, but why did you change your number without telling me? Helen, what has happened over these 3 years? I'm back now, everything will be okay. Click, 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 the sound of high heels echoed from the 4th-floor staircase. Ethan Young immediately stood up straight. That sound, it's Helen's. Carrying a bag of bubble tea in a backpack slung over her shoulder, Ethan Young rushed up to the 4th floor. Helen. Seeing the petite and lovely figure walking up with her head down, Ethan Young couldn't contain the emotions surging in his heart and called out loudly. Helen. That voice, no, it couldn't be. He wouldn't come back. He must have forgotten about me, right? 3 years, not a single reply to my letters. 3 years, not a single phone call. 3 years, not even a single message. He's no longer my Ethan. How could he appear in front of me now? I must have misheard. Ethan Young's vision blurred. His Helen, he had returned, so why wouldn't she look up at him? Ethan Young rushed in front of Helen Drew, not even giving her right foot a chance to touch the step before he pulled her into his arms. Helen, my Helen, I'm back. Your Ethan has returned. Ethan Young's deep, warm voice resonated softly in Helen Drew's ears, whispering every word. No, Helen Drew forcefully pushed away the embrace that felt both familiar and distant. Ethan, her Ethan Young. He had long abandoned her. How could he have been so cruel as to leave her alone in a strange city, walking away without a second thought? Her Ethan, how could he have ignored her for 3 whole years? Her Ethan, how could he not even reply to a single letter? Her Ethan was no longer the same Ethan. Helen, be careful. Just as Helen Drew shoved Ethan Young away, she forgot she was standing on the steps. As she pushed him, her body tilted backward, about to fall. In the next second, she found herself caught in a familiar embrace. Chapter 7, No Way Back to the Past. Ethan Young, let me go. Helen Drew found herself tightly embraced by Ethan Young. Instead of feeling grateful for him saving her, a wave of resentment surged within her. 3 years ago, when I needed his arms around me, where was he? 3 years ago, when I needed his protection, where was he? Why does he always fail to appear when I need him the most? And now, what is the purpose of his sudden appearance? Ethan Young held Helen Drew tightly, gently patting her back. Helen, don't be angry. I know, I was wrong. I returned today without saying a word or giving you any notice. That's my fault. Please don't be mad anymore. Helen Drew forcefully pushed Ethan Young away, coldly meeting his surprised gaze with a faint smile. Ethan Young, whether you informed me beforehand or not, it doesn't matter to me. I'm not angry. Helen Drew ascended a few steps, looking down at Ethan Young from above. Ethan Young, there's something you might not know yet, I'm about to get engaged. After saying this, she ignored Ethan Young's shocked expression, turned, and walked upstairs. In that moment of turning away, Helen Drew seemed to hear the sound of her own heart shattering. What did she say? Engaged? She's going to get engaged. No, she must be angry with me, right? My Helen, how could she get engaged to another man? How could she love someone else? Impossible, it's absolutely impossible. Ethan Young snapped out of his daze and hurriedly dashed up the stairs. Just as Helen Drew was about to close her door, he managed to block it in time. "Helen, let's talk this through calmly. Don't act out of anger. Helen, I know I owe you 3 years. During those 3 years, I didn't give you any warmth. I didn't protect you. I left you alone in this city for 3 whole years. I'm sorry, I'm truly sorry. Please, give me some time, and I'll explain everything to you, okay? Act out of anger." Helen Drew laughed coldly as she looked at Ethan Young. "Ethan Young, do you still not understand what I'm saying? We can't go back to the past anymore. We've already broken up. And I have a fiancé now. He and I are about to get engaged. Please leave, can you?" "Ethan Young, what exactly do you want? Back then, you were the one who decided to leave me. And now, do I need your permission to live my new life? Whatever I do I still need your approval?" In Ethan Young's eyes, a fleeting trace of sorrow appeared, but his face remained resolute as he said, "Helen, can we have a serious talk? Helen, I refuse to believe you could be this heartless. You're definitely hiding something from me. Is it because of my mother? Did she come to see you? Did she force you to do this?" Ethan Young grew increasingly uneasy, imagining the possibility that his mother had found Helen, revealed everything to her, and, unable to accept Helen's background, pressured her. A proud person like Helen, how could she continue being with him? Helen Drew gritted her teeth, intending to slam the door shut, but Ethan Young blocked it. She glared at him for a moment before giving up, opening the door wide, and saying coldly, "Come in, say what you need to say." Ethan Young offered a faint smile. "Helen, I bought your favorite bubble tea." He placed the cup on the table and sat down on the sofa. Helen Drew glanced coldly at the bubble tea on the table. A fleeting warmth stirred in her heart, but it vanished as quickly as it came when she recalled how Ethan Young hadn't been there for her during her most vulnerable moments. "If you have something to say, just say it." She ignored the bubble tea, walked into the kitchen, retrieved 2 cans of cola from the fridge, set them on the table, and sat down across from Ethan. "Helen, did my mother come to see you?" Ethan Young asked anxiously, his eyes fixed on Helen Drew, searching for any hint in her expression. To his surprise, her face remained completely unchanged, her gaze distant and unfamiliar. "Your mother?" Helen Drew found his question amusing. For years of university, for years of being together, and neither of them had ever mentioned their parents or disclosed anything about their family backgrounds. Helen had hidden her identity as the heiress of the Drew Corporation because she didn't want anyone to approach her for that reason. She only sought genuine friendship and love, free from ulterior motives. Ethan Young let out a sigh of relief when he saw the mocking expression on Helen's face. He was certain now that his mother hadn't approached her. Thinking back on the years he'd kept so much from her, he realized it was time to come clean. "Helen, actually, there's something I've never told you." Ethan began, but the ringing of Helen Drew's phone interrupted him. Ethan froze, his face filled with disbelief at the sound of her ringtone. Helen Drew sneered inwardly. "Ethan Young, I'm no longer the naive Helen Drew I once was. The ringtone you composed for me, I replaced it long ago. There's no going back to the past." Chapter 8, The Secret Lover Relationship. "Do you really want to get engaged to that woman?" On the messy bed, her small cherry lips pouted in displeasure, and her slender hands clung tightly to the man beside her. "Lucas, say something. That hateful woman, only 3 years in the company, and she had already won Lucas Carter's heart. Who knows what despicable tricks she used to make Lucas Carter agree to the engagement." Ivy Nash thought about how she had spent 10 years in the company, giving her all, and finally managed to climb into Lucas Carter's bed. She always believed that the position of the company's chairwoman would be hers. But then Helen Drew appeared. Ivy Nash recalled Helen Drew's usual demeanor at work, always dedicated, always polite to everyone. That woman was a master at pretending. If only I had known she would steal my place, I would never have let her into the company, let alone allowed her any chance to approach Lucas Carter. The corner of the man's lips curved into a faint, devilish smile before quickly disappearing. He turned his head and looked at Ivy Nash gently. I've told you before, we're just using each other. I've also said there will never be any feelings between us. His mother had once told him that emotions were the most lethal weapon against women, as well as their greatest vulnerability. Such a cold statement, yet Lucas Carter delivered it to her so tenderly, causing Ivy Nash's hands, which were wrapped around him, to tremble slightly. Lucas, what are you saying? I'm just worried that she's getting engaged to you because she's after the Carter Corporation's power. Before Ivy Nash could finish her sentence, Lucas Carter brusquely pushed her hands away. That hurts. Ivy Nash withdrew her hands, not understanding why Lucas Carter had suddenly become so angry. Could it be that he had truly fallen for that woman? Was even speaking ill of her now off limits? A glint of malice flashed in Ivy Nash's eyes. Helen Drew, I will never let you marry into the Carter family so easily. The Carter family's daughter-in-law can only be me, Ivy Nash. Lucas Carter sat up, his upper body bare, and looked coldly at Ivy Nash. What I do is none of your business. With that, he got off the bed, grabbed his clothes from nearby, and began putting them on. Ivy Nash bit her lip, swallowing her tears, and forced a pleasing smile. Lucas, what are you saying? I'm just worried about you. Barefoot on the cold marble floor, Ivy Nash wrapped her arms tightly around Lucas Carter, pressing her cheek against his back as she softly pleaded, You're taking her to meet your mother tonight, so could you stay with me this afternoon instead of going anywhere? Helen Drew wanted to marry him, well, it wouldn't be that easy. She wanted to cling to him, to show Helen Drew that he belonged to her. If Helen wanted to compete, she wasn't even qualified. Lucas Carter, expressionless, brushed Ivy Nash's hands away. There's still a client waiting for me. With that, he grabbed the tie beside him and left the room without hesitation. The lingering intimacy in the room still hung in the air. Ivy Nash stared blankly as Lucas Carter walked out. She collapsed to the floor in despair, hugging herself tightly. Why? Why can't you, just once, refuse a client for me? Why? Lucas Carter, a colleague for 10 years, we've been together for 8. Could it really be that I mean less to you than Helen Drew, someone you've known for only 3 years? Ivy Nash leaned against the edge of the bed in hopelessness, her vacant eyes fixed on the ceiling. Lucas Carter, why can't you see me, the one who's always been by your side? I've sacrificed so much for you. Why can't you love me? Suddenly, as if struck by an idea, Ivy Nash quickly stood up, grabbed the bathrobe beside her, and headed into the bathroom. A spark of determination flickered in her eyes. Helen Drew, you want to meet Lucas Carter's mother tonight? Keep dreaming. With that, she stepped into the bathroom and slammed the door shut. Chapter 9, The Misunderstanding Between Us. Helen Drew saw the astonishment on Ethan Young's face and felt a twinge of discomfort in her heart. What was wrong with her? Ethan Young had been so heartless towards her, yet just one expression from him unsettled her. Helen Drew, you cannot be this weak. You must remember, he was the one who wronged you first. Now you have a boyfriend, and you're about to get engaged. You cannot falter for another man. Hello, Lucas. Helen Drew turned away, refusing to meet Ethan Young's gaze. She thought she truly didn't care anymore, but the unease in her heart lingered. She feared seeing the pain in Ethan Young's eyes, dreaded witnessing the sorrow on his face. Clutching her phone tightly, she tried to make her voice sound as calm as possible. Helen, are you home? I'll drive over to pick you up, came Lucas Carter's gentle voice from the other end of the line. Helen Drew glanced over her shoulder at Ethan Young, who was frowning on the sofa. After a moment's thought, she replied, Yes, I'm home. Call me when you're downstairs. Ethan Young, I. Don't understand why you're still seeking me out. We've already broken up. I want to start a new life. Why can't you let me go? Helen, who is Lucas? Why are you speaking so intimately with that man? Ethan Young clenched his fists, struggling to suppress his anger. Once Helen Drew ended the call, he couldn't hold back any longer. He stood abruptly and stormed over to her. Helen, tell me, what happened in these 3 years? Why are you so cold to me now? Earlier in the hallway, she had mentioned having a boyfriend. Could it really be true? Helen Drew stared at Ethan Young coldly, raising her phone in front of him. Ethan Young, everything you just heard is true. I have a boyfriend, and we're preparing to get engaged. Now, please leave. With that, Helen Drew walked toward the door, intending to open it and show Ethan Young out. Helen. As she passed by him, Ethan Young grabbed her left wrist forcefully, pulling her into his arms. Helen, don't be angry. I'll explain everything to you, all right? Helen, you can only belong to me. How could you love another man? How could you even think of getting engaged? How could you treat me like this? Do our 4 years together mean nothing compared to the 3 years apart? Helen Drew fell into Ethan Young's arms, momentarily lost in the embrace, but quickly regained her composure. This warm hug would no longer belong to her. At the very moment her heart shattered, she already understood clearly. Ethan Young, I once wrote you a letter, I told you we should break up. You didn't reply, you stayed silent. Now that you've returned from the military, you want to ruin my happiness, don't you? Helen Drew struggled, trying to free herself from Ethan Young's embrace. What are you saying? Ethan Young looked at Helen Drew in shock. Taking advantage of his moment of confusion, Helen Drew broke free from his arms. A letter? The letter you wrote to me? The most precious letters to him were carefully kept, waiting for the day he would return to read them together with her. He never imagined one of them was a breakup letter. Helen Drew opened the door wide, took a deep breath, and suppressed all the emotions in her eyes. Ethan Young, please leave now. Ethan Young, we are already in the past. I don't want to live in the past anymore. Helen, listen to me first. Helen, it's not what you think. My feelings for you have never changed. The letters I wrote to you, you haven't even had the chance to read them. If I had known about the breakup, I would have dropped everything and run back to you, even if it meant taking over the family company. I wouldn't have hesitated. Helen, don't you know? From the very first moment I met you, I knew you were the one I wanted to spend my life with. Helen, why are you standing by the door like this? Just as Helen Drew was about to speak, she heard Lucas Carter's voice coming from behind her. Chapter 10, The Past and the Present. Lucas, let's go. After half an hour of back and forth, Helen Drew could no longer endure it. Earlier, at the door of the house, she had thought Lucas Carter would be furious upon seeing another man inside his home. Unexpectedly, he calmly invited Ethan Young to join them at a cafe. Helen Drew was feeling deeply frustrated. She glanced at Lucas Carter, who remained seated quietly, and reluctantly sat back down. If Lucas Carter had shown even the slightest hint of anger upon seeing Ethan Young at the door, she wouldn't feel this uneasy now. Lucas Carter, you're about to get engaged to me, so why does it feel like you're drifting further and further away? Over the past 3 years, the care you've shown me, was it truly love? Helen Drew turned her head, furrowing her brows as she gazed at Lucas Carter in contemplation. Helen. Ethan Young noticed Helen Drew staring intently at Lucas Carter, and a pang of jealousy rose in his chest. Mr. Carter, thank you for taking care of Helen over the past 3 years. Helen, you belong to me. Right now, I want nothing more than to open all the letters in my backpack. I want to know what grievances you've endured during the time I wasn't by your side. You're not someone who changes easily, nor are you someone who falters without reason. Before Ethan Young could finish his sentence, Lucas Carter spoke slowly, Mr. Young, it seems you still haven't come to terms with reality. At present, I am Helen's boyfriend, while you are merely a part of her past. Ethan Young, so you've finally appeared. I've been waiting for you for over 10 years. Ever since I was a child, I knew I had to surpass you, to take everything you had. Only then would I feel a semblance of peace within myself. Helen Drew anxiously gripped the cup in her hand, her lips pressed tightly together, feeling deeply uncomfortable inside. Clearly, she wanted Lucas Carter to speak up for her, to prove that she belonged to him. But the moment he opened his mouth, her chest felt suffocated. Her handbag vibrated violently. Helen Drew took out her phone and saw the name Ivy Nash displayed on the screen, causing her brows to furrow even more. Hello, Director Nash. Helen Drew noticed the two men in front of her glaring at each other and decisively picked up the phone to answer. Helen, the documents I asked you to print this morning, why haven't you brought them to me yet? Ivy Nash sat in her office, leisurely glancing at the clock on her desk, her lips curling into a cold, meaningful smile. A flicker of surprise crossed Helen Drew's eyes. I already placed the documents on your desk this morning. After 3 years at the company, she still couldn't understand why Ivy Nash always made things difficult for her. As a result, every time Ivy assigned her a task, she made sure to complete it as quickly as possible, leaving no room for error. Today, wanting to leave early to prepare for the evening visit to Lucas Carter's family to meet his mother, she had printed the documents and placed them directly on Ivy Nash's desk without saying a word. Helen Drew, I've looked not less than 5 times, and I don't see any documents you're talking about. I'm giving you 10 minutes to be in my office. With that, Ivy Nash hung up the phone, her alluring eyes fixed on the pile of shredded paper in the trash bin as she sneered. Helen Drew took a deep breath, put her phone back into her handbag, and forced a faint smile. Lucas, I need to return to the office. I probably won't be able to visit your mother tonight. Without another word to Ethan Young, she grabbed her bag and stood up, ready to leave. Helen. Ethan Young stood up, reaching out to grab Helen Drew's hand. Work is over. Can you talk to me seriously for a moment? Helen, seeing you like this, it breaks my heart. Helen Drew forcefully shook off Ethan Young's hand, her face devoid of emotion as she said, Ethan Young, it's over between us. Ethan Young, the sorrow in your eyes tells me you still love me, doesn't it? But none of that matters anymore. Truly, it doesn't matter anymore. Do you know what it's like to be alone in an unfamiliar city, with no one to rely on, pushing through every hardship on your own? Do you know how hard it is to face obstacles without even one person to confide in? Every time my parents called, I could only smile with tears in my eyes, telling them I was fine. But do you know how long I cried in the bathroom after hanging up the phone? Ethan Young's right hand slowly dropped as he watched Helen Drew walk out the door. His fists clenched tightly, he turned around, his gaze sinister as he stared at Lucas Carter, who was leisurely sipping coffee on the chair. What exactly do you want? Chapter 11, The Confusing Rival in Love. Did Ethan Young and Lucas Carter get into a fight? Sitting in the taxi, Helen Drew anxiously gripped her phone, wanting to call Lucas Carter. However, after thinking it over for a while, she finally put the phone back into her pocket. Over the past 3 years, Lucas Carter had brought her warmth and many touching moments, but for some reason, Helen Drew always felt a sense of unease deep inside. The scene that had just unfolded at home still left her feeling unsettled. Lucas Carter was her boyfriend, yet when he saw another man appear in their house, he didn't even furrow his brow. Helen, will you be my girlfriend? In the stillness of the night, a gentle breeze lifted Helen Drew's hair. Under the moonlight, she saw Lucas Carter looking at her with deep affection. A wave of warmth surged through Helen Drew's heart, and her cheeks flushed. Lucas Carter, are you serious? Since joining the company, Lucas Carter had always cared for her, but she had never realized he had feelings for her, as he was equally attentive to other employees. However, to this day, Helen Drew still couldn't understand why Lucas Carter always maintained a cold demeanor toward Ivy Nash. Lucas Carter looked at Helen Drew with gentle eyes. Helen, you've been at the company for over a year now. Haven't you felt anything about my feelings for you? Ethan, do you know? Someone confessed to me. If it were in the past, I would have coldly watched these men perform their little acts in front of me, indifferently telling them that I already have a boyfriend who loves me. But somehow, when I looked into Lucas Carter's eyes, I couldn't bring myself to say a word. Seeing Helen Drew standing still, not saying anything, just quietly looking at him, a glimmer of light flashed in Lucas Carter's eyes. He stepped forward a few paces and embraced Helen Drew. Helen, trust me, I will bring you happiness. Miss, we've arrived. The driver stopped the car in front of the Carter Corporation's gates, calling out to Helen Drew in the back, Miss, we've arrived. This young lady had been lost in thought ever since she got in the car. Perhaps young people nowadays are under too much pressure. The driver glanced at Helen Drew through the rearview mirror, watching her take out her wallet. He sighed inwardly, wondering if his carefree little boy at home would grow up one day and face similar troubles. Helen Drew snapped out of her thoughts, looked out the car window, and saw that they had arrived at the Carter Corporation's entrance. She pressed her lips together, took her wallet out of her bag, and smiled as she handed the fare to the driver. Helen Drew, I told you to be in my office in 10 minutes. Do you even know what time it is now? Ivy Nash held a stopwatch in her hand, glaring angrily at Helen Drew. The tasks I assign to you are never completed on time. Don't think that just because you're the CEO's secretary, you can act as if you're above the rules. Let me tell you, I am the general manager of this company, and whatever I instruct you to do, you must complete without question. Helen Drew raised her head, her face cold. Director Nash, I placed the printed documents on your desk this morning. Moreover, every time you assign me a task, I do my best to complete it immediately. I was only 1 second late, and besides, I knocked on your door for a full minute before you let me in. Ever since being with Lucas Carter, she had overheard from other colleagues that Ivy Nash had always liked Lucas Carter. From the moment Helen joined the company, Ivy Nash had been targeting her. Because of this, Helen had shifted from her previous tolerance to open defiance. So, are you saying this is my fault? Ivy Nash suddenly calmed down, the corners of her mouth lifting slightly. Helen Drew, don't think that just because you're with President Carter, you can secure the position of Mrs. Carter of the Carter Corporation. Ivy Nash stepped closer to Helen, whispering in her ear, as long as I'm here, don't even dream about it. After speaking, her gaze turned venomous as she stared at Helen Drew. Helen Drew's alluring eyes met Ivy Nash's directly. Director Nash, whether I marry Lucas Carter or not, it's none of your concern. Initially, Helen thought Ivy Nash targeted her simply because she was new. Later, she realized it was because Ivy Nash disliked any female employee in the company, fearing that Lucas Carter might take an interest in someone and jeopardize her own aspirations to become Mrs. Carter. Helen Drew wasn't someone to be easily manipulated. Once she understood the real reason, she stopped hiding her sharpness and instead worked harder, just to see Ivy Nash's face twist in anger. Print all these documents for me immediately. If I don't see them on my desk before the end of the day, you'll regret it. With that, Ivy Nash furiously threw a thick stack of papers in front of Helen Drew, lifted her head high, and walked away in her high heels. Helen Drew clenched her fists tightly, reminding herself to stay calm and not lose her temper. Hearing Ivy Nash's footsteps fade into the distance, Helen squatted down and began picking up the scattered documents from the floor. Chapter 12, The Conversation Among Men. She's gone. Lucas Carter's face remained emotionless as he lifted the coffee cup in front of him and took a slow sip. His gaze stayed fixed on the man sitting across from him, completely ignoring Helen Drew's figure disappearing outside the window. Ethan Young withdrew his wistful gaze, his sharp eyes locking onto Lucas Carter. Lucas Carter, do you really love her? Lucas Carter didn't love Helen Drew at all. Helen, deep down, you must know that, don't you? When Lucas Carter saw me appear at the place where you live, he wasn't surprised at all. Instead, he was so calm. Even though he knows I'm your ex-boyfriend, and I showed up in the house you two used to share, if he cared about you, how could he not feel even a hint of jealousy? Ethan Young clenched his fists tightly, wishing he could tear apart Lucas Carter's fake facade. Lucas Carter, you don't love her at all. Ethan Young saw Lucas Carter calmly sipping his coffee, completely ignoring his words, and his gaze grew colder. Ethan Young, everything that belongs to you, I want to take. Lucas Carter placed the coffee cup down, a faint smile curling at the corner of his lips. Originally, I planned to take Helen home to meet my mother today, but since you've returned, let's forget it. You've come back at just the right time. In 3 months, Helen and I will be engaged. Oh, by the way, Lucas Carter suddenly leaned forward, lowering his voice, have you seen the large poster across from the train station? Ha ha, ha ha. You did it on purpose. Ethan Young gritted his teeth, but there was no way to make Lucas Carter admit his wrongdoing in front of Helen Drew. Helen, why couldn't you wait for me to return? Helen, over the years, what have you been through? Have you forgotten all our promises? Ethan Young's eyes turned icy, his right hand clutching the backpack slung over his shoulder. It seemed he'd have to stay at a hotel tonight, carefully going through the letters Helen had written to him. Lucas Carter laughed heartily, Ethan Young. The eldest young master of the Young Corporation, who would have thought you'd have a day like this? Suddenly, Lucas Carter's face turned cold. Your identity, I bet Helen Drew still doesn't know, does she? Tell me, if I were to reveal this to Helen Drew, would she hate you even more? Back then, he deliberately approached Helen Drew, even sent people to investigate everything about her during her 4 years of university. How ridiculous it was that 2 people in love for 4 years didn't even know each other's true identities. However, a flicker of unease crossed Lucas Carter's mind. Helen Drew's background had been under investigation for 3 years, yet no clues had surfaced, as if someone was deliberately obstructing it. But who could it be? Ethan Young sneered, leaning back in his chair lazily. In Helen's heart now, I hold no place at all. If you want to tell her, go ahead. My identity cannot be revealed by Lucas Carter, it must come from my own mouth. Only then can Helen's resentment toward me lessen. What Helen hates most in this world is being deceived. During the 4 years we were together, we never asked about each other's family backgrounds. To call it deception seems inaccurate, and to call it concealment doesn't feel entirely right either. We simply avoided the topic unintentionally. Lucas Carter hadn't expected Ethan Young to be so indifferent. Could it be that seeing Helen Drew's resolute attitude toward him, Ethan had given up on their 4-year relationship? No, that couldn't be. The Ethan Young I know would never be someone like that. President Carter, I'll leave Helen in your care for now. I'll bring her back to my side soon. Ethan Young stood up, grabbed the backpack slung over his shoulder, sneered again, and strode out. Father, the path you've laid out for me, I will find a way to break free from it. At this moment, I finally understand that only power and wealth can protect the one I want to protect. I want the Carter Corporation to disappear from this city. I want Lucas Carter to lose everything. Lucas Carter abruptly stood up. Ethan Young, aren't you curious why I keep targeting Helen Drew? With his back turned to Ethan Young, Lucas Carter could still sense the slight pause in Ethan's steps. Before Ethan could respond, Lucas heard his cold voice. Your purpose, I don't care. All I know is that I want Helen back by my side. Only I can bring her happiness. Helen, this city is where our dreams began. I will fulfill that dream. I want you to realize that the days without me have led you astray. I am your guide, your compass, your beacon. Only I can lead you back to the right path. Lucas Carter angrily swept all the coffee cups off the table onto the ground. The coffee splattered, soaking his brown trousers. Shards of the broken cups scattered around his feet. Ethan Young, I refuse to believe Helen Drew isn't your weakness. I won't let you have your way. I want Helen Drew to hate you for the rest of her life. I want the two of you to never be together. Chapter 13, Sorry, I'm late. Helen, still not done with work. Jack Wilson from the finance department walked into the office holding a stack of reports. Seeing Helen still seated at her desk organizing documents, he looked at her curiously. Helen, didn't you request leave this afternoon? Why are you back here? Jack Wilson passed by Helen Drew, glancing at the pile of documents on her desk. Hearing someone call her name, Helen Drew turned her head and smiled. President Nash asked me to reprint a document. Helen, President Nash is giving you a hard time again. Jack Wilson shook his head, his face showing sympathy as he looked at Helen Drew. Why did you have to get so close to the president? Helen's beauty was something everyone in the company acknowledged, and being the president's secretary only made it more obvious. Those with keen eyes could see that President Nash liked Helen Drew. How could he not take the opportunity to make things difficult for her? Jack Wilson placed the reports on her desk, glancing at Helen Drew as she lowered her head to organize the papers. A bitter smile appeared on his lips. He could only hope that one day, Helen would meet a man who truly loved her and take her away from this place. The president has quite the reputation as a playboy. No matter how much he seems to care about Helen Drew, it's clear to everyone that his intentions aren't good. Jack Wilson sighed. Who knew what Helen Drew was thinking? The president treated her well, and she didn't refuse him. With a face that caused trouble for countless young women, it was no wonder people were drawn to him. Sigh, if I were 10 or 20 years younger, even I might not be able to resist falling for the president. Helen Drew kept her head down, continuing to organize the documents. Hearing Jack Wilson's words, her hands trembled slightly, and she bit her lip, a flicker of pain flashing through her eyes. She knew exactly what kind of person Lucas Carter was. Though he always maintained the image of a flirtatious playboy on the outside, after being around him for so long, the most he'd ever done was hold her. Lucas Carter's attentiveness couldn't compare to Ethan Young's, but when she needed encouragement the most, it was Lucas who showed up. When she needed warmth the most, it was Lucas who stayed by her side. No matter what others thought of him, to her, at least, he was good. Helen, I'm heading out now. Little Melly's school is over, and I need to pick him up, Jack Wilson said, mentioning his beloved son with a sparkle in his eyes. Helen, don't work too late. Go home early. With that, he grabbed the bag on the table and walked off, his slender high heels clicking against the floor. Helen Drew waited until Jack Wilson was out of sight. Feeling helpless, she threw the stack of documents onto the desk and slumped into the chair beside her, her vacant eyes staring at the messy papers. Helen, our breakup is only temporary, trust me, 3 years from now, we will be together forever. These resolute words from Ethan Young 3 years ago still echoed in her ears. Helen Drew raised her hands to cover her ears tightly, unwilling to hear it. Little did she expect that those words would haunt her like a curse. Ethan Young, do you have any idea how much I resent you? When I wrote to you, why didn't you reply? Why, when I said we should break up, did you not care at all? And now, what does your return mean? What is the purpose of the heartbroken expression you're showing? Why did you treat me like this? Why? Helen Drew pressed her hands against her ears, silently sitting on the chair. An hour passed, then 2. The lights outside the window gradually turned on, but the office remained shrouded in darkness. Helen. A familiar voice sounded beside her. Was it him? No, it couldn't be. How would he know she was here? Helen Drew shook her head, tightly closing her eyes, curling herself up, hugging her knees. Before she could open her eyes, Helen Drew found herself enveloped in an embrace that was both familiar and distant. It was him, it really was him, still carrying that faint minty scent. A single transparent tear involuntarily slid down, landing on the broad back of his hand. Helen, I know everything now, I know it all. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I came back too late. Ethan Young held Helen Drew tightly, trying to warm her frozen heart. This afternoon, back at the hotel, he had read all the letters scattered on the bed. The more he read, the more his heart ached. Over the past 3 years, Helen had endured so much suffering alone. He should have thought about it. Alone in this unfamiliar city, with no one to rely on, she had worked tirelessly to secure a position at the Carter Corporation. She had faced the cutthroat schemes of the business world and the hardships of life. Helen's heart had long grown weary. Helen, I'm so sorry. Get out. Helen Drew suddenly opened her eyes and forcefully pushed Ethan Young away. Ethan Young, get out of my sight. Chapter 14, He has fallen in love with her. Ivy Nash gazed intensely at the man sitting across from her. Lucas, didn't you say you wanted to go home tonight? So why did you ask me to join you for dinner like this? Humph, that vixen, thinking she could compete with me. She's far too inexperienced. Just the thought that Lucas Carter, who should be spending time with Helen Drew right now, was instead sitting opposite her filled Ivy's heart with indescribable joy. Lucas Carter, visibly annoyed, picked up the glass of red wine in front of him, poured himself a drink, and downed it in one go. Just as he was about to pour another, Ivy Nash's coy voice interrupted him, stirring a wave of irritation within. Be quiet for a moment. Ivy Nash, this foolish woman. At work, she pretends to be a strong, independent woman, but in private, she's not only flirtatious but also plays dumb. A pair of delicate, soft hands rested on Lucas Carter's wrist. Lucas, you've had enough to drink tonight. Lucas Carter, you're angry, aren't you? Is it because I ruined your plan, stopping you from taking Helen Drew home to meet your mother? Let me tell you, I won't let you be with her. Your mother is my future mother-in-law, she's already tacitly approved of me. Humph, even if you managed to bring her home tonight, your mother would never agree to it. Let go. Lucas Carter's eyes glinted with a menacing sharpness. Focus on enjoying your meal. With that, he forcefully shook off the small hand resting on his, grabbed the wine glass, and poured himself another drink. Ivy Nash gripped the fork on the table, stabbing her food with frustration. She glanced up at Lucas Carter several times before finally blurting out, Lucas, do you really love her? Lucas Carter's hand, holding the wine glass, paused briefly. His gaze flickered, and he let out a cold laugh. What do you think? Helen Drew. From the beginning. She's been nothing more than a target, just a pawn in my game. How could I possibly love her? No matter how good she is, I could never fall for a woman Ethan Young once loved. The woman meant for Lucas Carter could never be someone like Helen Drew, whose background remains a mystery. Her origins are still untraceable. Could Helen Drew be an orphan? Lucas Carter tilted his head back, finishing the wine in his glass, a bitter smile playing on his lips. Judging by Helen Drew's daily demeanor and her taste in fashion, she's definitely not an orphan. But among the wealthy heiresses today, none carry the surname Drew. Helen Drew, what is your true identity? He had once deliberately sent people to trouble her, just to see if someone was secretly protecting her, but surprisingly, there wasn't even a single person by her side to console her. Lucas Carter set the glass down, his eyes narrowing slightly. No matter who you are, as long as you're someone Ethan Young cares about, that's all that matters. Lucas, don't you realize? Ever since you started dating Helen Drew, you've changed a lot. You no longer frequent those places, you don't come home late, and you've stopped being a flirt, Ivy Nash said as she set her fork down, looking seriously at Lucas Carter. I think you've fallen in love with her. A woman's intuition is always sharp, especially since I've been by your side for so many years. I've noticed every change in you, even if you haven't. But I will never let Helen Drew marry you. Shut up. Lucas Carter slammed the bottle of wine onto the ground. Be quiet. I will never love Helen Drew, my heart died a long time ago. My mother told me from a young age that the most unreliable thing in this world is love, only power can be trusted. After graduation, I built my career from scratch, rising from a lowly employee to the CEO of a company. I've worked harder than anyone else, all for the sake of revenge. My heart holds only hatred, not love. Ivy Nash was startled by Lucas Carter's outburst, staring at him in shock. The fork in her hand trembled uneasily. Take your time eating. I'm leaving, Lucas Carter said, glancing up to see all the restaurant patrons staring at him in surprise. His eyes turned icy as he scanned the room coldly before standing up. Ivy Nash dropped her fork abruptly, quickly grabbing her handbag. Let me take you home, she said anxiously. Lucas had drunk so much tonight, driving himself home would be dangerous. Fine, Lucas Carter replied, shoving his hands into his pockets without sparing Ivy Nash a glance. His face was emotionless as he stared ahead indifferently. Ivy Nash followed closely behind Lucas Carter, a warm feeling rising in her chest. Lucas, no matter how angry you are, you'll never abandon me. In this world, only I am the woman who truly suits you. Chapter 15, The Girl Who Knocked at Midnight. Ethan Young quietly stood by the window, gazing down from the 23rd floor of the high-rise building. It was past 1 a.m, yet the streets were still packed with vehicles. This city was slowly coming alive, as the nightlife of its people was just beginning. A cold smile curled on Ethan Young's lips. One day, everyone in this city will know the name Ethan Young. BZZZ, BZZZ, BZZZ. The phone on the table buzzed sharply. Ethan Young turned around, picked up the phone, and upon seeing the name on the screen, the smile in his eyes deepened. Ryan Blake, how's the progress? Helen, I want you to know that I am the only one who can bring you happiness. I understand why you reject me now because all of this is my fault. But I will make amends for the pain I've caused you. In the past, I was the one who abandoned our vow and left, while you held on for the sake of our shared dream. Now, I can't let you bear the burden of our original aspirations alone. I will stand by your side and fight with you. Young master, everything is going smoothly, a deep male voice came from the other end of the line. Ethan Young walked over to the sofa, his lips curling into another cold smile. Remember, assign someone to keep an eye on the Carter Corporation for me. I want Lucas Carter's file faxed to me by tomorrow. Only by fully understanding the opponent can one secure victory. Yes, young master. Ethan Young threw his phone onto the sofa and leaned back tiredly. Helen, do you really hate me that much? Recalling tonight at the Carter Corporation, Helen Drew's coldness and hatred toward him still made his heart ache. Ethan Young, you shouldn't have come back, let alone appeared in front of me. To me, you're just a stranger. Please don't show up in front of me again. Helen Drew stood opposite Ethan Young, looking at him sternly, her face colder than ever. Ethan Young felt a slight tremor in his heart and forced a wry smile. Helen, do you really hate me that much? Helen, you're not living well at the Carter Corporation, so why stay? What are you enduring, silently suffering for Lucas Carter? If he truly loved you, he wouldn't treat you this way. Knock knock knock, just as Ethan Young closed his eyes, the image of Helen Drew accusing him at the Carter Corporation flashed in his mind. The sound of knocking came from the door. Ethan Young frowned in annoyance. It was past 1 a.m, who could be knocking at this hour? Was the service at this 5-star hotel really this bad, disturbing guests in the middle of the night? Ethan Young shifted his position, still lying on the sofa, eyes fixed on the ceiling, hands clasped behind his head. At this moment, he needed quiet, time to think carefully about how to win back Helen Drew's heart, how to bring her back to his side. In this lifetime, his heart had only ever been moved by Helen Drew. Giving up on the woman he'd loved for 7 years wasn't going to be easy, especially when their breakup had happened without his knowledge. Thinking of the letters on the bed, Ethan Young wished he could burn them immediately. Why hadn't he opened them back then? If he had, he wouldn't be in this turmoil now, and Helen wouldn't be with another man. Bang bang bang, bang bang bang, the knocking outside grew louder and louder. A frosty look passed over Ethan Young's eyes as he stood up and walked toward the door. The increasingly loud knocking caused his lips to press into a tight line. Why did it stop? A pair of small hands pounded against Ethan Young's chest. Hearing no sound in response, the girl muttered in dissatisfaction, "Am I too weak?" Ethan Young opened the door, but before he could clearly see the woman in the baseball cap standing before him, she had already landed a punch on his chest. "Miss, you're quite strong. Was this really a five-star hotel? Allowing a woman to knock on a guest's door in the middle of the night?" "Ethan." Upon hearing Ethan Young's voice, the girl, who had been pouting, immediately looked up, her eyes sparkling with joy. She threw herself into his arms happily. "Ethan, I finally found you." Ethan Young looked at the doll-like face under the baseball cap, and his expression immediately darkened. "Lily Brooks, what are you doing here?" Chapter 16, Lucas Carter's Mother. "Mom." Lucas Carter casually tossed his keys onto the sofa in the living room, leaning wearily against the wall. As his finger touched the light switch, he was startled to see Sophia Carter sitting on the couch. Sophia Carter, her face stern, stood up and looked at Lucas Carter, her voice filled with reproach. "Do you even know what time it is?" Lucas grew more and more perplexed. 3 years ago, he had declared he would reclaim everything that rightfully belonged to him. The hatred in his eyes back then had made his mother feel an overwhelming urge to tell him everything. But she hesitated, wondering if he would despise her if she revealed the truth. Now, all she had left was him. She had lost everything else. If she lost her son too, what would she have left? "Mom, I'm sorry." Lucas Carter offered a gentle smile. "Mom, why are you still up so late? You should be resting." He walked over to Sophia Carter and poured her a glass of warm water. Sophia Carter sighed, the anger on her face gradually fading. "Lucas, you said you'd bring your girlfriend over for dinner tonight. I waited all evening, and I couldn't even reach you by phone." She sat down, picked up the phone from the sofa, tapped it twice, and her expression darkened. "You even turned it off." Since noon, she had personally gone to the market with the housekeepers to buy groceries. Then she had spent the entire afternoon supervising them in the kitchen. From 6 in the evening until 10, she had been calling Lucas Carter repeatedly, worried something might have happened to him on the way home. But to her dismay, his phone had been turned off. The corners of Lucas Carter's mouth lifted slightly. "Mom, next time, I'll bring her home for dinner." Lucas Carter's eyes flicked to the phone in Sophia Carter's hand, a trace of nervousness flashing through him. He worried she might turn it on and see the ambiguous photos of him and Ivy Nash stored inside. Thinking about Ivy Nash's little tricks in front of him, he sighed inwardly. Perhaps he shouldn't have gotten involved with that woman in the first place. But as a man, how could he allow Ivy Nash to manipulate him as she pleased? "Go to bed early, son." Sophia Carter gave Lucas Carter a deep look, said nothing more, placed the phone on the table, and went upstairs. Lucas Carter nodded, "Good night, Mom." Watching Sophia Carter head upstairs, Lucas let out a soft sigh, picked up the phone on the table, and pressed the power button with his index finger. Sophia Carter turned around, standing in the middle of the staircase. She saw Lucas press twice on his phone, a fleeting trace of melancholy flashing in her eyes. Holding on to the staircase railing, she slowly ascended. Lucas was already grown up, there were some truths he needed to know. But how could she bring herself to tell him? As his mother, not only had she failed to bring him any pride, but instead, she'd subjected him to the scorn of others since childhood, forcing him to live in the shadows. Sophia opened the door to her room and quietly sat down on the edge of the bed, a bitter smile appearing on her face. "Sophia Carter, all these decades of suffering are the result of your choice back then. You deserve this." But Lucas was innocent. Why was fate so cruel? Lucas hadn't brought his girlfriend home tonight, had the two of them argued? Seeing the weariness on Lucas's face, Sophia sighed helplessly. Madam, recently the CEO seems quite close to his secretary. The housekeeper had said this to her 2 years ago. At the time, she had merely smiled and brushed it off. Was Lucas treating any female colleague poorly at the company? No, just as he himself once said, girls are to be protected and cherished, not hurt. Moreover, Sophia had always noticed Ivy Nash's feelings for Lucas. If, in the end, Lucas didn't choose Ivy, it could only mean that their closeness had bred familial affection, not love. Lucas's secretary, his secretary. Sophia walked over to her desk, pulled open a drawer, and took out a diary. If she remembered correctly, she had noted down the name of Lucas's secretary in this very diary. It was the summer 2 years ago, around June. Quickly searching through the pages, she found an entry from June 17. The note briefly recorded the housekeeper's words, Madam, recently the CEO seems quite close to his secretary, Helen Drew. Would you like to meet her? Helen Drew. That name sounded so familiar, where had she heard it before? Sophia pondered, trying to recall, but the memory eluded her. Lucas, is the girlfriend you want to bring home this Helen Drew? In the past, I didn't pay attention to her, but now, I need to know everything about you, and even more about this girl. If you're seeking revenge, I will stop you, because none of this is a burden you should bear. Back then, all I wished for was your success. Seeing you rise through your own efforts to become the CEO of the Carter Corporation made me so proud. I don't want you to carry any unnecessary weight on your shoulders. Sophia Carter's finger pointed at the 3 words Helen Drew on the diary, a glint of light flashed in her eyes, then disappeared. Chapter 17, for her, choosing to compromise. Ethan, where are you going? Lily Brooks rubbed her eyes and saw Ethan Young getting ready to head out. She quickly got out of bed and said, Ethan, you must not have slept well on the sofa last night. I've had enough rest, you should go back to sleep. Ethan, where are you planning to go this early? Morning jog. That doesn't seem right. I've never seen Ethan wear a suit before. I didn't expect him to look even more handsome in a suit than in his military uniform. Ethan Young affectionately patted Lily Brooks' head. Lily, I have some matters to attend to. Go back to sleep for a bit. Later, I'll book an additional room next door. Last night, Lily had arrived late, and going downstairs to book a room was inconvenient. Besides, Lily kept pestering him with questions, making it impossible for him to leave earlier. Lily covered her mouth, her eyes wide with guilt as she looked at Ethan. Ethan, I'm so sorry. I'll go downstairs and handle the room arrangements myself later. You go ahead with your work. I barged in on Ethan in the middle of the night, making him sleep on the sofa the whole time. How could I be so shameless as to let him take care of me? No, I promised Dad that I wouldn't cause Ethan any trouble while I'm here. If Dad finds out about this, he'll definitely make me go back home. Just get some more rest, Ethan said with a faint smile at the corner of his lips. He picked up the stack of documents from the table, a sharp glint flashing in his eyes, before opening the door and stepping out swiftly. Ethan, you're truly too good, Lily murmured to herself. I've made up my mind, I want to marry you so that you'll always be this good, but only to me. Dad, I'm bringing Ethan home to meet you. I'll let you know that your favorite student is actually going to be your future son-in-law. Ha, ha. Lily twirled happily on the floor but suddenly remembered something and dashed into the bathroom. Young master, the documents are ready, and the venue has been arranged. All that's left is for the master to make one phone call, and everything will be finalized. In the driver's seat, a man in a brown shirt turned around and respectfully addressed Ethan. The master just called and asked if you could return the call. After speaking, the man faced forward again, his expression serious, hands firmly gripping the steering wheel, awaiting Ethan's instructions. Ethan Young's face darkened. Could it be that his father insisted on forcing him to bow down before agreeing? Ethan clenched his fists tightly. Helen, for you, I am willing to bow before. My father. He knew that now he needed his father's help. Helen, once he thought he could give her everything, she only needed to wait for his return, and they could build a world that belonged to just the two of them. He never expected that when he came back, what he would see was her departing figure. Lucas Carter was not someone she could entrust her life to. If she found a man who truly loved her, perhaps he would let go, but Lucas Carter was absolutely not that man. He was definitely not someone good. Ryan Blake, where are the documents on Lucas Carter? Ethan Young asked as soon as he woke up, noticing the empty fax machine on the desk. Who exactly was Lucas Carter that Ryan Blake couldn't uncover his background? Ryan Blake lowered his head, frowned, and turned to speak apologetically. Young master, all we've discovered is that the Carter Corporation was established 10 years ago and became the city's dominant force overnight. No one knows who his backer is. He had worked tirelessly all night but found nothing. Not even where Lucas Carter had lived before was known. Lucas Carter, like the Carter Corporation, seemed to have appeared in the city overnight, becoming an unattainable star in everyone's eyes. Ethan Young lowered his gaze, making it impossible for Ryan Blake to discern his thoughts. Continue to have people monitor every move of the Carter Corporation. I refuse to believe we can't uncover his background. Yes, young master, Ryan Blake replied respectfully. Ethan Young took out his phone, glanced at the name on the screen, and let out a soft sigh. Drive to the Quinn Corporation building. I've been avoiding this for 3 years, yet I still can't escape my father's grasp. Ethan, have you made up your mind? The moment Ethan Young pressed the call button and the other end picked up, a deep, steady male voice rang in his ear before he could even speak. Ethan Young clenched his left hand tightly, trying to make his voice sound calmer. Father, I've made my decision. For that woman, is it worth it? The disdainful tone from the other end startled Ethan Young slightly. Father, he knows everything. Helen, could she be in danger? Chapter 18, Ethan's Preparation. Father, please do not interfere in my personal affairs. Ethan Young closed his eyes, took a deep breath to calm himself, then opened them, a glint of ruthlessness flashing in his gaze. I know exactly what I'm doing, so please rest assured. Father, I admit, I've lowered my head before you for Helen, for the sake of reclaiming the love that belongs to me. But that doesn't mean I will take over the Young Corporation. I want to build my own career. Ethan, you must understand, your future wife absolutely cannot be a girl of ordinary background. The somber voice on the other end of the line sent a wave of unease through Ethan Young. Ethan Young's expression turned cold. Father, my wife will be chosen by me. I will never let my marriage become a pawn in the business world. I don't need a wife who merely appears harmonious yet is unaligned in spirit, nor do I want to spend my life with a stranger. His sharp eyes stared ahead as he silently vowed in his heart, Helen Drew, in this lifetime, I've already decided you will be my wife. You cannot escape. CEO, the board members are waiting in the meeting room. The secretary's voice came through on the other end. I understand. Please leave for now, Ethan replied. A stern voice echoed once more in Ethan Young's ear. Ethan, do whatever you want with confidence. But I'm giving you only 3 months. 3 months from now, I want to see you in the living room of the Young family's house. With that, the call ended abruptly. Young master, we've arrived. Ryan Blake parked the car in front of the Quinn Corporation building. Before the car had even come to a complete stop, a portly man was already rushing over. Ethan Young glanced out the window, a cold smirk playing on his lips. He opened the car door himself. President Quinn, why trouble yourself to greet me personally? The man before him was dressed in a black suit, but his rotund figure made the attire look somewhat comical. His protruding belly had even forced the buttons of the suit to strain apart. "Ethan, no need to stand on ceremony with me. Last night, the commander gave orders, saying you'd been discharged and returned home. He wants us old veterans to take good care of you." President Quinn beamed, his small eyes narrowing into slits. "Come, let's head inside first. I've already prepared all the documents you need." "Ha, ha. This time, let's see if the commander has misjudged anyone." A sharp glint flashed in President Quinn's eyes as he squinted slightly, making it hard for Ethan Young to discern the intentions behind his gaze. Ethan turned his head and quickly signaled to Ryan Blake with a glance before following President Quinn into the building. Ryan, meanwhile, stayed behind in the car to wait for him. "Ethan, why did you suddenly decide to start a company in this city?" President Quinn leaned back in his chair, taking a long drag from his cigarette and exhaling a dense cloud of smoke. "You must know, this place is complicated, people get rich fast, but they can also fall just as quickly. Still, kid, with the commander and your father backing you, anyone thinking of crossing you better think twice about the consequences." "Humph, just another spoiled rich kid. If not for the commander's sake, why would I waste my time sitting here, smoking and chatting with him?" Ethan Young flicked the ash off his cigarette. "President Quinn, I'm no stranger to this city. Developing here isn't something that can be achieved overnight. This time, I've come hoping that we can have more business collaborations in the future." After speaking, Ethan Young stubbed out his cigarette forcefully in the ashtray and stood up. "I have other matters to attend to." "Excuse me." Without sparing a glance at President Quinn's face, which was shifting through a range of emotions, he turned, opened the office door, and walked toward the elevator. Bang! The ashtray was violently hurled to the ground by President Quinn. "Ethan Young, how dare you show me that attitude? Henry Quinn has never been afraid of anyone. One day, I'll make you come begging to me." A sinister glint flashed in President Quinn's eyes as he stood up in fury, sweeping all the papers off his desk onto the floor. "Young master, do you think it's wise to not give President Quinn any face? What if he—" Ryan Blake had clearly observed that when Ethan Young stepped out of the car earlier, though he wore a smile, the coldness in his eyes was enough to send shivers down anyone's spine. Ethan Young flipped through the file in his hands. "Father mentioned that the Quinn Corporation will face financial troubles in 3 days. I think by then, who begs whom will be the real question. Besides, I quite fancy the position of the Quinn Corporation." Hearing Ethan Young's words, Ryan Blake understood. Ethan Young never did anything without certainty. Moreover, since the old master had already predicted that the Quinn Corporation was heading toward bankruptcy, there was even less reason for concern. "Ryan Blake, tell Adam Hayes to return. I want to meet him tonight. Tomorrow, I'll need him to assist me in recruiting staff. Helen, I'll show you that I'm the one you should choose. As for Lucas Carter, I'll peel back his layers one by one to reveal his true self to you." Chapter 19, His Gentle Side. President Carter. Helen Drew had just stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the 18th floor when a handsome man entered as well. She clutched the stack of documents tightly in her hands, her lips pressed together, and a hint of unease flickered in her eyes. "About yesterday, I'm sorry." Helen Drew didn't know how to explain yesterday's incident to Lucas Carter. Before accepting his proposal, she had made it clear she had broken up with her ex-boyfriend. Yet now, not only had he returned, but he also showed up at her house and even argued with Lucas Carter. Helen Drew felt a headache coming on, unsure how to handle the situation. Lucas Carter smiled gently at Helen Drew, his expression warm. "Helen, the circles under your eyes are heavy. What time did you go to bed last night?" His gaze shifted to the stack of documents in her hands, and his heart sank. Was it Ivy Nash assigning her tasks again? Making her work late into the night? A sudden, inexplicable anger surged within Lucas Carter. Helen Drew forced a faint smile and raised her left hand to touch her eyes. I went to bed a bit late last night. Was it that obvious? She had deliberately applied makeup this morning. Hugging the stack of documents to her chest, Helen Drew sighed inwardly. She had chosen this company because it was the fastest growing and most profitable in the city. However, she hadn't expected that every employee here would be so complex. Some pretended to be clueless to avoid power struggles, while others acted weak to conceal their true strength. In such a deceitful corporate environment, she truly felt out of place. She had once considered leaving, but she stayed for the man standing before her. Wherever he was, there was sunlight. She believed he would bring her happiness. "Helen, if you can't finish the work today, leave it for tomorrow," Lucas Carter said. He knew well how Helen Drew had lived these past 3 years. Sometimes, when they planned to watch a movie together, she would suddenly cancel because of work. And every time, Ivy Nash conveniently appeared to keep him company. Over the years, Lucas Carter had turned a blind eye to these incidents because he knew Helen Drew was merely a pawn in his game. Now, however, the appearance of Ethan Young had shattered his usual arrogance and indifference. Ethan Young's uniquely domineering presence made him feel uneasy. Helen Drew could not be taken away by Ethan Young. Helen Drew smiled gently. "I prefer to finish my work on the same day." Suddenly, she thought of something and asked anxiously, "Was your mother upset last night?" It was her first time visiting Lucas Carter's mother, but the situation had been ruined by Ethan Young's unexpected arrival. Did she leave a bad impression on his family? Feeling uneasy, Helen Drew tightened her grip on the stack of documents in her hands. Lucas Carter gently looked at Helen Drew, comforting her. "Your mother knows you had an urgent matter at work, so she doesn't blame you. Don't worry, I'll arrange for you to meet her later." "Helen Drew, it's been 3 years. You've been working in the company for that long, yet you still haven't learned how to be pretentious. Seeing that you're still as pure as ever, I don't know whether to feel happy or sad. I think I finally understand why Ethan Young has liked you for so many years, and why I was able to approach you so quickly back then." Ding! The elevator reached the 18th floor. As the doors opened, Helen Drew saw Ivy Nash standing in front of her and Lucas Carter with a bright smile. "President Carter." Ivy Nash had been standing by the office window, watching as Lucas Carter's car slowly entered the parking lot. A faint smirk appeared on her lips. She quickly turned around, grabbed a bottle of perfume from her desk, sprayed it generously, adjusted her outfit, and stood by the elevator door waiting for Lucas Carter. However, the smile on Ivy Nash's face disappeared in less than a second when she saw Helen Drew. She asked coldly, "Why are you here?" "Helen Drew, why do you always have to show up in front of me and Lucas Carter?" "Humph, even if you're Lucas Carter's woman, in this company, you're not worthy of standing next to him." Helen Drew noticed Ivy Nash flashing a seductive smile at Lucas Carter, and her heart ached slightly. "Director Nash, I am President Carter's secretary. Wherever President Carter goes, I go." There were rumors in the company about an ambiguous relationship between Ivy Nash and Lucas Carter. Could it be true? No, it couldn't be. When she was with Lucas Carter, he never mentioned Ivy Nash. Moreover, Helen Drew now noticed a flicker of disgust in Lucas Carter's eyes, yes, disgust, directed at Ivy Nash. "Director Nash, is the collaboration plan with the Forest Group ready?" Lucas Carter, seeing Ivy Nash approaching, quickly stepped back a few paces and subtly signaled to her that Helen Drew was standing behind him. Ivy Nash was rendered speechless by Helen Drew's words and was fuming. However, upon hearing Lucas Carter's voice, she forced a charming smile and replied, "It's ready. I'll bring it to your office right away." With that, Ivy Nash swayed back to her office to retrieve the documents. "Helen, today I have to discuss the collaboration with Ivy Nash for the Forest Group. You can head home early. Don't worry too much about your mother, she doesn't blame you. Tonight, make sure to get some rest." Lucas Carter spoke gently. Helen Drew's cheeks flushed red. "I understand. I'll get back to work now. Hugging her stack of documents, Helen Drew hurried toward her office, her heart filled with warmth. Lucas Carter loved her, cared for her. At the very least, even while working, he didn't forget to comfort her anxious heart. Chapter 20, An Unexpected Incident at the Cafe. Madam, why don't we go straight to the Carter Corporation to find Miss Helen Drew? The man sitting across from the elegant lady fidgeted restlessly, feeling entirely out of place. Especially sitting in this luxurious cafe, no matter how he adjusted his position, he couldn't shake off the discomfort. Just one cup of coffee here cost as much as his meals for an entire day. If it weren't for the madam insisting he sit across from her and even ordering him to drink this bitter coffee, he wouldn't have come here to endure such torment. Thinking about the roadside stalls and the juice from small shops that tasted far better than this coffee, he couldn't fathom why wealthy people enjoy drinking something so bitter and astringent. Sophia Carter gracefully lifted her coffee cup. Jack Wilson, you've been with the Carter family for over 10 years now. Don't you understand what I want to do today? 10 years ago, she had seen Jack Wilson handing out flyers on the street, a boy not even 18 years old, already working hard to make ends meet. At that time, she had just sent Lucas Carter abroad and was feeling lonely. Seeing this boy reminded her of Lucas. She approached him and asked a few questions, learning that he was an orphan. From that moment, she decided to take him in, funding his education, teaching him to drive, and eventually making him her personal chauffeur. Looking at Jack Wilson now, he was no longer young. Over the years, she had forgotten to find him a wife, something she felt she ought to remedy. Madam, Jack Wilson can't guess your intentions, Jack Wilson replied, desperately. Wanting to stand up, but seeing the madam across from him sipping her coffee elegantly, he hesitated. Everyone around him wore polite smiles, while he alone squirmed uneasily in his seat. Spotting a man ahead and slightly to the right stirring his coffee with a spoon, Jack felt a flicker of relief and quickly picked up his own spoon to stir the cup in front of him. Jack Wilson, have you met Helen Drew yet? Sophia Carter smiled gently, looking kindly at Jack Wilson. Jack Wilson nodded honestly, yes, I have. Miss Helen Drew is very beautiful, even more stunning than the models at the company. Jack Wilson recalled the first time the young master asked him to drive Helen Drew home. At that moment, he thought women as beautiful as her only existed on television. He never imagined he'd see someone like her in real life, let alone have the honor of driving her home. That moment left him stunned. If Helen Drew hadn't called out to him, he might have stared at her in awe for half an hour. A beautiful woman. A sharp glint flashed briefly in Sophia Carter's eyes, so quick that Jack Wilson didn't notice. Jack Wilson, I heard from Lucas that after lunch, Helen Drew often likes to sit at this cafe. Detailed information about Helen Drew had been under investigation for 3 years with no results. Her school records had been completely removed after graduation. Strangely enough, the section regarding family members was always left blank. Could she be an orphan? Sophia Carter quickly dismissed the thought. If Helen Drew were an orphan, it was more likely she was the illegitimate daughter of a wealthy family. Madam, Miss Helen Drew has arrived. Jack Wilson suddenly sat up straight, his eyes fixed on the beautiful figure entering through the door. Honey, have you wronged me? As Helen Drew stepped into the cafe, she immediately noticed a couple arguing nearby. The wife's voice rang out loudly, you went to have coffee with this woman and lied to me, saying you were meeting a client. What about the baby I'm carrying? Don't you care at all? Have you wronged me? Helen Drew frowned. She hadn't expected the seemingly polished man to secretly cheat on his pregnant wife, only to be caught red-handed. Humph, men, unfaithful men were the worst. A flicker of disdain crossed her eyes as she walked toward a window seat. Darling, please give me another chance, just this once. Think about our child, forgive me this time. Helen Drew heard the man pleading desperately as she sat down. Do you think I can trust you again? I'm 5 months pregnant, and how many times have I caught you already? And every time, it's a different woman. Ha! I can't believe how blind I was to marry someone like you. The woman angrily shook off the man's hand, but he persistently clung to her. Frustrated, she grabbed a cup of coffee from the table and threw it forcefully at him. Madam! A man's shout and a piercing scream suddenly echoed in the cafe, louder than the argument of the couple earlier. Helen Drew turned her head and saw a lady dressed entirely in white, now covered in coffee stains. Her white blouse was dotted with large and small coffee marks. Helen Drew grabbed her handbag from behind her, stepped forward, and pulled out tissues from her bag. Madam, are you all right? Helen Drew handed the tissues to the elegant woman, who looked stunned, then turned around with a cold expression on her face. You're a man. While your wife is pregnant with your child, not only do you fail to stay by her side and care for her, but you're also unfaithful to her. Don't you feel guilty toward your wife? The child in her womb is yours. Do you want your child to grow up knowing that while they were about to be born, their father was with another woman? Helen Drew's enchanting eyes flashed with anger. And you're a pregnant woman. Whatever you do, you must take responsibility for yourself and even more so for your child. What if he had pushed you down just now? Would you regret it? Right now, you're filled with rage. Do you think the baby in your womb can't feel it? Chapter 21, A Suppressed Conversation. Mrs. Drew, are you all right? Jack Wilson saw Helen Drew being pushed to the ground by the couple and hurriedly ran over to help her up. Unexpectedly, the couple, who had been arguing just a second ago, immediately joined forces when they saw Helen Drew scolding their loved one, pushing her down together. The man then embraced the woman and walked away, completely ignoring the other woman screaming behind them. Helen Drew shook her head with a calm expression. Thank you. Perhaps this was true love, choosing to hurt each other themselves rather than letting someone else harm the one they loved. Mrs. Drew, hello. Sophia Carter, who had been sitting on the chair observing Helen Drew's every move with a cold demeanor, finally spoke. She was a woman of noble and elegant appearance, yet her inner emotions were incredibly passionate. Lucas Carter was fortunate to have her love. However, when she learns the full truth, will she still choose to stay by Lucas Carter's side? Helen Drew gave a faint smile. Madam, hello. Who was this woman, dressed so regally, standing in front of her? Jack Wilson was the Carter family's chauffeur, so why was he sitting in a cafe with this woman? No matter how she looked at it, this woman didn't seem to be Jack Wilson's mother. Could she be his aunt? Helen Drew felt a bit puzzled, but her face betrayed no sign of doubt. Mrs. Drew, do you happen to have some free time to sit with me for a bit? The more Sophia Carter looked at the young woman before her, the more she admired her. She only hoped Lucas Carter wouldn't hurt her. Helen Drew had an aristocratic air about her, a quality Ivy Nash could never match. Moreover, Sophia Carter knew exactly where Ivy Nash had come from all those years ago. If it weren't for the fact that Ivy Nash still held some usefulness to Lucas Carter, Sophia Carter would never have turned a blind eye to their ambiguous relationship for so many years. Adjusting her emotions, Sophia Carter smiled warmly and kindly at Helen Drew. Helen Drew glanced at the time on her phone. She still had an hour before work. All right. Helen Drew sat down across from Sophia Carter and noticed that Jack Wilson was still standing beside them. Surprised, she asked, Jack Wilson, aren't you going to sit down? Jack Wilson was about to reply when he caught Sophia Carter's glance and quickly responded, Mrs. Drew, the young master still has matters to discuss with me. Please excuse me. Jack Wilson turned to Sophia Carter with a respectful look and said, Madam, please excuse me. Receiving a nod from Sophia Carter, Jack Wilson breathed a sigh of relief, turned around, and left. His face showed evident joy as he finally escaped the cafe that had made him so uncomfortable. Now, he needed to head to the street-side eatery where his close friends gathered, eager to rid himself of the lingering scent of the upscale restaurant. Miss Drew, I heard from Jack Wilson that after graduating, you came to this city alone. Weren't your family members worried? Sophia Carter watched Jack Wilson's departing figure before retracting her gaze and gently looking at Helen Drew, a glimmer of cunning flashing in her eyes. Hearing Jack Wilson address the woman opposite her as "Madam," Helen Drew felt a trace of doubt. What exactly was this elegant lady's identity? Jack Wilson was the Carter family's driver, so why was he so deferential to her? As a waiter approached, Helen Drew ordered, "A latte, please." Once the waiter left, she heard the elegant lady across from her speak. A fleeting trace of panic crossed Helen Drew's eyes but quickly disappeared. The corners of her mouth lifted slightly into a faint smile. Back in college, I already dreamt of living in this city. So, after graduation, I came here to work. Helen Drew skillfully avoided mentioning her family, but her words still conveyed to the elegant lady that her move to the city had her family's approval. "Miss Drew, may I ask where you're currently working?" Sophia Carter lifted her coffee cup and gazed at the scenery outside the window. A trace of pride appeared on Helen Drew's face. The Carter Corporation. In this city, the Carter Corporation is one of the leading enterprises, and everyone on the street is aware of its existence. It must be said, Lucas Carter himself is truly a business prodigy. Thinking about the message Lucas Carter had just sent her, Helen Drew's cheeks suddenly flushed. Sophia Carter raised an eyebrow, her eyes sparkling. "I've heard the CEO of the Carter Corporation is a young and talented individual. In your opinion, what kind of person is he?" Helen Drew looked up in surprise, staring blankly at the elegant woman in front of her. Noticing the probing gaze of the woman, Helen Drew felt completely uneasy. For more than 20 years, this was the first time she had felt so flustered, as if someone had seen right through her. Helen Drew apologetically looked at Sophia Carter. "Madam, it's almost time for work. Let's talk later, shall we?" With that, she quickly grabbed the handbag behind her and walked briskly toward the restaurant door. Helen Drew clutched her handbag tightly, feeling the searing gaze behind her still following her every step. She bit her lip, silently telling herself not to look back, and certainly not to show any weakness under this woman's gaze. A trace of confusion flashed in Helen Drew's eyes. She couldn't understand why this elegant woman, whom she was meeting for the first time, was pressing her so relentlessly. Chapter 22, The Terms of Exchange. "Dad, I'm at Ethan's new house," the young girl said smugly, propping her feet up on the sofa as she spoke into the phone. "Don't worry, I won't cause any trouble for Ethan." She hadn't expected Ethan to be so wealthy. Last night, he told her he was preparing to start a company in this city. And this morning, he'd come knocking on her door, asking her to pack her things so he could show her his new house. The man on the other end of the line spoke sternly, "Lily Brooks, did you sneak off to find Ethan without telling me?" Lily Brooks held the phone away from her ear for a moment, rolling her eyes and pouting. She thought to herself, "Dad is so annoying. I've already graduated from college this year, I can pursue the life I want, and I can date if I want to. Why does he insist on controlling me? Having a father who's a soldier is such a pain, he always wants to bind me with military rules. Dad, I'm helping Ethan unpack now, okay? Bye-bye," she hurriedly said, ending the call before her father could respond. Lily Brooks placed the phone down on the sofa and let out a sigh. Her dad always loved lecturing people. She couldn't imagine how Ethan had managed to endure it back then. Sprawled out on the sofa, she stretched out her legs, propped her hands behind her head, and gazed at the ceiling. I wonder what Ethan is doing right now. Is he busy with his new company? She suddenly sat up, determination flashing in her eyes. No, I have to pursue Ethan. I've already decided, I want Ethan to become my dad's son-in-law. Springing to her feet, she ran barefoot upstairs. Ethan, your new company must need a lot of employees. I'm going to apply right now. I want to be your secretary. I want to see you every day, make you love-filled breakfasts every morning, brew you warm coffee at work, and quietly admire you while you're busy. That's it, I'll make it happen. Young master, this afternoon, the CEO of the Quinn Corporation wants to meet and discuss with Lucas Carter. Ryan Blake stood opposite Ethan Young, handing over the document in his hand. Ethan Young took the document from Ryan Blake, flipped through it, and a trace of contempt flashed in his eyes. Find someone to closely monitor the CEO of the Quinn Corporation for me. As for Lucas Carter, I need someone to coordinate. Look into who their accountant is. Lucas Carter, I never expected you to exploit Helen Drew. If you truly loved her, how could you let her endure 3 years of bullying from a woman named Ivy Nash while you stood by and did nothing? What surprises me even more is that Ivy Nash turns out to be your person. I will expose your true face, I will let everyone know you are a hypocrite. I will make the Carter Corporation disappear from this city. Ryan Blake nodded and added, Adam Hayes is in the adjacent meeting room interviewing new employees. Do you want to take a look? It's been years since I last saw Adam Hayes. If it weren't for the young master starting this company, perhaps Adam Hayes and I would have had to wait a few more years to meet again. Since childhood, we were adopted by the old master. If not for him, we might have starved to death long ago. Even if we hadn't starved, life would have forced us into theft. No need, I trust Adam Hayes's judgment. Ethan Young stood up, suddenly narrowing his eyes slightly. Ryan Blake, you still haven't uncovered Lucas Carter's background? Who exactly is Lucas Carter, and why can't we find any information about him? He managed to rise to fame in this city overnight, the powers behind him can't be underestimated. But who is he, really? Young master, the master asked me to remind you not to forget the agreement with him and not to forget the promises made to him. Ryan Blake bowed respectfully, his eyes fixed on the marble floor, his heart pounding nervously. Ethan Young turned around, looking through the floor-to-ceiling window, observing the traffic and pedestrians below. He spoke coldly, I know. Father agreed to let me stay in this city and even allowed me to start a business here. However, the terms of the deal were not just that I must stand in the Young family mansion's living room 3 months from now, but also that I must investigate an accident from 10 years ago. But after a decade, where should I even begin to investigate? Young master, I'll take my leave now. Ryan Blake looked up and saw Ethan Young waving slightly with his back still turned. Bowing respectfully once more, Ryan turned and exited the room. Father, the accident from 10 years ago, who exactly do you want me to find? Ethan Young murmured as he watched the endless flow of people outside. Chapter 23, Lucas Carter's Coldness. Lucas, my brother, you must help me this time, or I'm done for. Sitting in the quiet office, CEO Quinn looked dejected, continuously puffing on his cigarette. Unable to hold back, he continued, I've already explained everything to you. You have to think of a way to help me. He had been sitting at the Carter Corporation headquarters all afternoon, and the ashtray in front of him was already overflowing with cigarette butts. Yet, Lucas Carter, sitting across from him, calmly sipped his coffee, showing no intention of offering assistance. Lucas Carter cast a cold glance at CEO Quinn, then casually stood up, walked to the fridge, and pulled out 2 bottles of beer. CEO Quinn, I think what you need right now is this. Lucas Carter gave a faint, devilish smirk. CEO Quinn, you're upset, and the Quinn Corporation is facing financial troubles, but that doesn't mean you can come to my office to vent. He placed the beer in front of CEO Quinn, then turned and walked to the window, throwing it wide open to let the fresh air flood in. Lucas, my brother, what do you mean by that? CEO Quinn frowned, crushing the cigarette in his hand before grabbing the beer next to him. You should know, we're in the same boat. Humph, you want to see me sink and fend for myself, Lucas Carter? Not so fast. Don't forget who gave you a chance back in the day, who helped you establish yourself in this city. Now that you've gained power and become his trusted confidant, you intend to stand by and watch. Let me tell you, it won't be that easy. Lucas Carter turned around, walked up to General Manager Quinn, and sat down. General Manager Quinn, over the past few years, you know better than anyone the state of your company's business. Moreover, you've been incurring losses every single month. I've helped you for so many years, and as for the favor you did for me back then, I believe I've repaid it in full. Lucas Carter coldly grabbed another bottle of beer, opened it, and let the icy liquid flow down his throat. It seemed that only this could constantly remind him of the pact he made with the devil years ago, of his cooperation with a demon, and why he had done it. Smack. Beer splashed all over Lucas Carter's pant leg. Lucas Carter, don't you forget. If it weren't for me recommending you to the boss back then, do you think you'd have what you have today? And don't forget, if it wasn't for me vouching for you in front of the boss, would you have gained control of the Carter Corporation? Humph, you ungrateful wretch. If I hadn't seen some potential in you and recommended you to the boss, you'd have starved on the streets, and I wouldn't have even spared you a glance. Now that you're getting closer to the boss and have become his trusted confidant, you want to sever ties with me? Let me tell you, it's not going to be that easy. A flicker of ruthlessness flashed in Lucas Carter's eyes but quickly disappeared. He looked up, his gaze carrying a hint of remorse. General Manager Quinn, it's not that I don't want to help you, but a few days ago, the boss gave me orders to focus all my efforts on managing the Carter Corporation and not to interfere with the Quinn Corporation. Tell me, have you offended someone? Even the boss? Lucas Carter noticed General Manager Quinn's face growing paler by the second and quickly lowered his gaze, hiding the thoughts in his eyes. His hands clenched into fists. 10 years ago was a past he dared not revisit, an experience too painful to recall. No, no way, absolutely no way. General Manager Quinn's pale face carried an expression of disbelief as he stared blankly ahead. The boss, how could he abandon me? His power spans the globe, what could he possibly fear? No, it can't be. That's right, I need to find the commander, beg the commander to help me. Thinking of our past camaraderie, the commander will surely help me. General Manager Quinn hurriedly stood up, staggering toward the door. General Manager Quinn, are you very familiar with Ethan Young? Just as Quinn was about to open the door, Lucas Carter suddenly spoke up. Quinn's hand remained on the doorknob as he hesitated, not looking back. Not really familiar, we just met briefly a few days ago. Instinctively, Quinn didn't want to disclose anything about Ethan Young to Lucas Carter. He didn't know why, but he simply didn't want to. Especially since earlier, Lucas Carter had shown no sympathy for his pleas and instead had deliberately made things difficult, bluntly stating that he was now worthless in the eyes of the boss. Lucas Carter stared intently at Quinn's retreating figure without saying a word. His face was icy cold, his teeth clenched tightly. He grabbed the ashtray in front of him and hurled it forcefully to the ground. Ethan Young, you dared to have someone investigate my past. If I hadn't prepared in advance, I wouldn't even know how much you've uncovered about me. Shards of shattered glass scattered everywhere, mirroring the broken state of Lucas Carter's heart. Fearful of his past being unearthed, he desperately tried to conceal it, but all he was doing was delaying the inevitable exposure of the truth. General Manager Quinn slowly stepped out of the Carter Corporation, turned around, and glanced at the large golden letters. The corner of her mouth curled into a cold smile. Lucas Carter, today you refuse to help me. One day, you will regret it. Ethan Young, why are you inquiring about Ethan Young? Humph, if you have a conflict with Ethan Young, I don't mind joining forces with him to watch you kneel before me, bit by bit. That wealthy second-generation heir. General Manager Quinn couldn't help but let out a cold snort. Compared to Lucas Carter, Ethan Young was far more appealing to her. Even though he didn't show her respect last time, it was because he had the ability to do so. And Lucas Carter? What abilities does he have to not respect her? Everything he possesses today is thanks to what she gave him years ago. General Manager Quinn strode toward the parking lot, silently vowing that one day she would see Lucas Carter's dejected face as he begged her for help. But for now, she had to deal with the current pressing matters. Chapter 24, Lily Brooks applies for the designer position. Young master, Miss Lily Brooks has arrived. Ethan Young had just stood up to head outside when he saw Ryan Blake rushing in. Miss Lily Brooks is currently being interviewed in the conference room. Ethan Young raised an eyebrow, a faint smile playing on his lips. It seems Adam Hayes doesn't know Lily Brooks. Standing up, his eyes gleamed with a sharp light. Ryan Blake, don't bother Adam Hayes. If Lily Brooks wants to work at the company, let's see if she's truly capable. Born into a military family, with a competitive nature and strict self-discipline, Ethan had always set high standards. He was curious to see whether Lily Brooks, a recent university graduate, was qualified to join the company. Ryan Blake looked at Ethan Young in surprise, speaking with confusion, but if Adam Hayes says something harsh to Miss Lily Brooks. Adam Hayes was known for his critical nature, demanding perfection in everything. It could take him all day to select one candidate, and at this rate, who knew how many interviews it would take to fill the company's vacancies. That's precisely what I like about him, his insistence on perfection in everyone and everything, and his unfiltered words. Only someone who constantly points out your flaws can help you confront your shortcomings and strive for perfection. Ethan Young picked up the fountain pen on the desk, tapping it lightly against the surface. Adam Hayes, go follow CEO Quinn for now. Also, tell the team under you to speed things up. I want to know Lucas Carter's identity as soon as possible. Lucas Carter, just who was he? Overnight, he had become the master of this city, yet every detail about him had been meticulously concealed. Who was backing him? Who exactly was he? Ryan Blake solemnly nodded and respectfully replied, Young master. General Manager Quinn stormed out of the Carter Corporation in a fit of rage. According to reports from subordinates, General Manager Quinn is currently looking for the commander. Lucas Carter, who exactly is he? Despite sending my most meticulously trained aides, we still can't uncover any information about him. Should I report this matter to the old master? No, the young master explicitly said he doesn't want the old master to know about Lucas Carter, nor does he want the old master to think his compromise is because of Miss Helen Drew. However, it seems the old master already knows why the young master compromised, he simply hasn't figured out who the young master's opponent is. To the old master, as long as the young master agrees to take over the company, no matter what he wants to do, the old master will support him. Oh. Keep monitoring him. It seems General Manager Quinn couldn't gain anything from Lucas Carter. A company teetering on the edge, a corporation on the brink of bankruptcy, who would be willing to lend a helping hand? Tonight, General Manager Quinn will undoubtedly need someone to share a drink with. If you find General Manager Quinn drinking alone at a bar tonight, call me immediately. Ethan Young stood up, glanced at the watch on his wrist, and said, Tell Adam Hayes to prepare the new employee files and place them on my desk by tomorrow morning. Young master, are you planning to visit Miss Helen Drew? Ryan Blake quickly asked as he saw Ethan Young preparing to leave. Ethan Young frowned, Ryan Blake, just focus on doing your job. With that, Ethan Young shot Ryan Blake a cold glance before striding towards the door. Ryan Blake pouted as he watched Ethan Young's back and muttered, I was just asking if you needed me to drive you there. Sigh, the young master's thoughts are truly hard to read. It's better to tell the boys to hurry up and get the information on Lucas Carter. Lily Brooks. Adam Hayes, wearing black-rimmed glasses and a neatly tailored suit, sat upright at the podium, carefully flipping through the documents in his hands. Seeing the bright smile of the girl in the photo, he felt a slight sense of goodwill and continued, Who is Lily Brooks? This girl has a decent academic record, and her major aligns well. I wonder if she can handle my questions. Lily Brooks, sitting across from Adam Hayes, smiled warmly and said, Hello, I'm Lily Brooks. Shall we begin? What's wrong with this guy? I personally handed him my resume, and yet he's asking for my name in front of the other interviewees waiting behind me. Lily Brooks immediately crossed out any positive impression she had of Adam Hayes. Looking at your resume, you just graduated and have no work experience. Do you think you can handle the position of a designer? Adam Hayes adjusted his glasses and looked disdainfully at the pretty girl in front of him. Lily Brooks silently cursed Adam Hayes in her heart. How dare he look down on her? He should know that she receives a scholarship every year, and her design works are still displayed on the school's bulletin board. Yet, Lily Brooks maintained a sweet smile on her face. Although I don't have work experience, I believe the products I design are no less impressive than anyone else's. Furthermore, since our company mainly deals with women's shoes, I'm confident that, as a woman, I understand what kind of shoes we need and what makes them comfortable to wear. A hint of admiration flashed in Adam Hayes's eyes as he noticed Lily Brooks showed no fear. Even when she admitted to her lack of experience, she remained calm and confident with a composed smile. For a designer, experience is indeed important, but even more critical is the recognition of one's own work. Experience can be gradually gained over time, but affirming and valuing one's creations is built on confidence in one's abilities. Only when you acknowledge your own work can others recognize your achievements. Congratulations, you've been hired. Chapter 25, He's not a suitable life partner. Commander is not here. General Manager Henry Quinn stood in front of the towering office building, bewilderedly looking at the female secretary across from him. Are you serious? The commander isn't here. How could this be? At a time when I'm caught between life and death, the commander is absent. General Manager Quinn, I'm sorry. This morning, the commander suddenly received a notice and had to attend a meeting in the province. The secretary smiled, raising the stack of documents in her hand. General Manager Quinn, when the commander returns, I'll inform him for you. I have other tasks to handle, so please excuse me. With that, she gracefully walked away, her slender high heels clicking rhythmically against the floor. At such a critical moment, the only person who could help me was the commander. Now that he's not here, who can I turn to? The boss? No, absolutely not. On New Year's Eve, I swore before him that even if I, Henry Quinn, were beaten to death on the streets, I would never beg him for help. Thinking back, the reason I made such a vow was all because of that meddling kid, Lucas Carter. General Manager Quinn trudged out of the office building, staring at the blazing sun overhead. After a moment of contemplation, he slowly took heavy steps toward the park. Where can I go now? The only house I had has already been mortgaged, and the company will soon be auctioned off. Right now, I don't even have a single penny to my name, not even a place to sit. He sighed helplessly, racking his brain to think of anyone who might be able to help him. Helen, do you have any appointments tonight? Helen Drew sat dazedly in her chair, her vacant eyes staring ahead. Most of the employees in the office had already left, yet she remained seated there alone. Helen. Emily Smith waved her right hand in front of Helen Drew's face. Helen, snap out of it. It seemed that ever since lunch, Helen had been lost in thought, staring blankly into space. During lunch, she was still laughing and chatting happily. Did something happen when she went alone to the cafe? Did she meet someone or witness something? Why does she look as though she's been frightened? Helen Drew vaguely heard someone calling her name. She snapped out of her daze and saw Emily Smith looking at her with concern. Ms. Smith, is the workday over already? Helen glanced around, it seemed like everyone else had left. The office was quiet, and the evening light was fading through the large windows. What had she been doing all afternoon? Helen tried to recall but couldn't seem to remember anything. Helen, what's wrong? Emily Smith pulled the chair next to her closer and sat down beside Helen Drew, asking worriedly, I heard you're dating the CEO, is that true? Everyone who's worked at the company for 5 or 6 years knows exactly what kind of person the CEO is. The media outside constantly reports about him, letting everyone know what he's like. He's undoubtedly a great boss, but he's not exactly ideal husband material. Helen Drew was stunned, her lips moved slightly, but she didn't know how to respond. At the company, she always kept her distance from Lucas Carter. Even though she was his secretary, if it wasn't work-related, she never entered his office. She wasn't like Ivy Nash, who would go into his office for any reason, whether there was something to discuss or not. Was it that obvious that she was dating Lucas Carter? Their relationship had been kept under wraps for over a year. How had people found out now? Seeing that Helen Drew had no intention of speaking, Emily Smith continued, "There's no denying that the CEO is a great boss. Having a boss like him is a blessing for us employees, but you must remember, he's still a man who's good to all women, not just one. And besides, he's someone constantly surrounded by scandals. Where there's smoke, there's fire, right? Let me tell you, every scandal in this world has a reason behind it. Think about it, if you kept yourself out of trouble, no matter how skilled those paparazzi are, where would they get their stories?" "Emily, I understand. Actually, ever since Ethan Young came back, I've been more and more unsure of my own feelings. I used to think that Lucas Carter and I were in love. Even though it wasn't as passionate as my love for Ethan Young, nor as deep, I believed that steady love was the best guarantee for a relationship. But now, it seems that might not be the case." Emily Smith looked at Helen Drew with an understanding gaze. "Take your time to think it through, but don't forget, women can't rely solely on men. You have to learn to be strong, and more importantly, have a career of your own." After speaking, Emily Smith glanced at the stack of documents on Helen Drew's desk that had yet to be opened, then returned to her own desk and began packing up her belongings. "Career, love?" Helen Drew gave a helpless smirk. When she graduated, she thought she and her boyfriend would work hard together in this city. Back then, she believed she was the happiest person in the world, at least she had love, and her career would come in the near future. But he chose to enlist in the military, and when she found new happiness, he came back. Helen Drew looked at the stack of documents on the desk, shook her head, tried not to think anymore, picked up the documents, and sighed. Another sleepless night awaited her. Chapter 26, Encounter with a Kidnapping. When we were kids, everyone dreamed of growing up quickly, so that one day we could wear beautiful high heels, walk down the street, and earn the admiration of others. But once grown up, people often long for the days of childhood when flat shoes brought such unmatched comfort. Helen Drew raised her right hand, gently brushing the hair off her forehead, tiredly gazing at the road ahead. She set the stack of documents in her hands down on the bench beside her, then removed her high heels. Looking at the red marks on her heels, she let out a wry smile and sat down. "Mom, I want to grow up quickly." As a child, she always admired her mother walking back and forth in beautiful high heels. "Helen, isn't staying as mommy's little princess forever a good thing?" Her mother would always lovingly embrace her, tenderly stroking her hair. "I want to grow up quickly so I can wear pretty high heels." The little girl back then, with her wide, round eyes, was always mesmerized by her mother's high heels, wishing she could grow up immediately to wear those beautiful shoes and walk everywhere. "Helen, to wear beautiful high heels, you have to work very hard." When she was young, she never understood why her mother's eyes always held a trace of worry whenever she said this. It wasn't until she grew up that she understood that concern. Perhaps her mother's worry had always been there, she just hadn't noticed it. From the time she entered high school, as she became more independent, her mother grew more anxious, afraid she would leave the protective embrace of her family, afraid she would get hurt. Helen Drew rubbed her ankle. "Mom, if you saw me like this now, you'd definitely drag me back home." Her eyes sparkled with a hint of amusement. It wasn't until she reached the company lobby that she realized she had forgotten her wallet, leaving her no choice but to walk home. Standing in the company lobby, she unlocked her phone and scrolled through her contacts. The person she instinctively wanted to call was Ethan Young. Taking her phone out of her handbag, Helen Drew stared at Ethan Young's name on the screen, a bitter smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Why couldn't she forget this man? When she needed someone the most, he had left her. Now, when she no longer needed him, he returned. Unfortunately, it was too late. 3 years had been enough for her to learn how to shoulder everything on her own. Besides, she already had a boyfriend now. The person she ought to reach out to was Lucas Carter. Where am I supposed to find money now? Who can possibly save me? General Manager Quinn sat anxiously on a bench, his restless eyes darting around. Suddenly, General Manager Quinn's small eyes locked onto a stunning figure not far away. A pale pink long dress, slender white legs just stepping out of an exquisite pair of high heels. That beautiful side profile, why did it look so familiar? General Manager Quinn furrowed his brows, his gaze fixed on the figure seated on the bench. Helen Drew. Yes, it was her, the secretary he'd seen at Lucas Carter's company. Wasn't there some rumor about her and Lucas Carter being involved? Word had it that Lucas Carter had even declared Helen Drew to be his girlfriend. Humph, this woman. Well, this time it's just her bad luck. If her man refuses to help me and even takes the opportunity to kick me while I'm down, then I have no choice but to make her pay for it. In General Manager Quinn's eyes, a glint of light flashed, and the corner of his mouth slightly lifted on the left side into a sneer. If you want to blame someone, blame Lucas Carter. Helen Drew sat on the stone bench for a while, noticing the park gradually becoming emptier as the sky was draped with a dark veil. She slipped on her high heels, grabbed the documents beside her, and was just about to stand up when suddenly everything went dark before her eyes. Miss Drew, what a coincidence. General Manager Quinn greeted warmly, his small eyes gleaming with cunning. Miss Drew, where are you planning to go? His gaze flickered to the stack of documents beside Helen Drew, momentarily showing surprise. Helen Drew was Lucas Carter's girlfriend, yet after working hours, Lucas Carter let his girlfriend bring work home. Ha! What a considerate boss, treating his girlfriend like this. Helen Drew frowned slightly, her face wary as she looked at the grinning man in front of her. General Manager Quinn. The slightly overweight man standing before her was indeed General Manager Quinn. She recalled the last time she had dinner with Lucas Carter and encountered him at a restaurant. He had kept Lucas Carter engaged in endless chatter, even spraying saliva everywhere, ruining her appetite for the evening. What was he doing here? Lucas Carter had once mentioned that General Manager Quinn was a sly old fox. For a man Lucas Carter labeled as such, it was clear he wasn't as harmless as his appearance suggested. So, Miss Drew still remembers me. General Manager Quinn glanced around. Miss Drew, I assume you haven't had dinner yet. Why don't we dine together? I'll have someone take you home afterward. Helen Drew smiled politely at General Manager Quinn and shook her head. How could I trouble General Manager Quinn? I still have some unfinished work. Excuse me, I must leave now. With that, Helen Drew stood up, intending to bypass General Manager Quinn and leave. Unexpectedly, General Manager Quinn grabbed Helen Drew's arm. Noticing a small white van at the corner of the street, he winked at someone inside the vehicle. Miss Drew, it's rare for us to meet. Won't you give Henry Quinn some face? General Manager Quinn, please let go of me. The overweight man indeed had great strength. From the way he casually pulled her, one could only wonder if her arm would end up bruised. Helen Drew. Before she could finish her sentence, a few respectful voices echoed nearby, and 3 men in black shirts had already stood beside her. Capture her for me and take her back. Director Quinn, seeing his men arrive, didn't bother with politeness toward Helen Drew anymore. With a cold expression, he glanced at her and commanded, hurry up. After speaking, he released Helen Drew's hand and walked toward the small truck, a cold smile forming on his face. He hadn't expected this woman to be so disrespectful. Inviting her to dinner and being refused? Fine, he'd resort to this method. Director Quinn, what are you doing? Let me go, let me go. Helen Drew shouted as she watched the 3 men in black shirts slowly approach her. Fear filled her eyes as she saw Director Quinn walking away. Her hands flailed nervously, trying to escape, but she soon realized she was already restrained by the three men. Chapter 27, The Future Daughter-in-Law of the Carter Family. Lucas, the contract with the Forest Group has been signed. Tell me, where should we go to celebrate tonight? Petite Ivy Nash leaned against Lucas Carter's shoulder, gazing adoringly at his handsome profile. Lucas Carter, do you know? From the very first glance, I knew you were my man. The boss assigned me to monitor you, but I've always stood up for you in front of him, making you one of his trusted confidants. I believe that one day, you'll love me and realize I'm 1,000, no, 10,000 times better than Helen Drew. I'm the one who's truly right for you. Lucas Carter gently pushed Ivy Nash aside, casting her a cold glance. My mother asked me to come home for dinner tonight. You've worked hard today, so head home early. Ivy Nash was an indispensable partner in his work. If she hadn't been sent by that person, perhaps he would have accepted her. Unfortunately, anyone sent by him, no matter how genuine or kind, always had an ulterior motive. Lucas, it's been a while since I last saw your mother, Ivy Nash said, grabbing her bag and looking at him expectantly. I remember she loves the pastries from the east side of the city. Why don't we pick some up for her as a late-night snack? Lucas Carter paused for a moment before nodding. Let's go. With that, he led the way to the garage. Ivy Nash, no matter how many schemes you come up with to marry me, as long as I don't agree, even if my mother approves, it's all pointless. My mother suffered too much because of me when I was younger. Now, all I want is to give her a peaceful and comfortable old age. Time and again, I bring you home, not because I accept you, and certainly not because my mother secretly acknowledges you as the Carter family's daughter-in-law, but because you treat my mother well and bring her happiness. Lucas Carter, your mother is your weakness. If I can win her heart, I believe a filial son like you will succumb to her pressure and agree to marry me. Life is long, and after marriage, I will be a good wife. I will make sure you become the happiest man in the world. At work, I will be your capable assistant, and in life, I will be your loving wife. Ivy Nash walked in her slender high heels, her lips curling slightly into a smile of happiness as she followed closely behind Lucas Carter. At this moment, in the Carter family's villa, Sophia Carter held a photo of Helen Drew and asked, Jack Wilson, what do you think of Helen Drew? Helen Drew did not resemble an ordinary secretary, nor did she look like an orphan. Her innate noble demeanor commanded attention wherever she went. When Helen Drew reprimanded others, the aura she exuded made it impossible for anyone to underestimate her. Jack Wilson hesitated for a moment before replying, Madam, Miss Drew is very kind. The madam had already met Helen Drew and even witnessed her helping a vulnerable woman, so why was she asking about her now? Jack Wilson scratched his head, unable to fathom what the madam was thinking. Sophia Carter carefully placed Helen Drew's photo back into an envelope and said, Don't tell Lucas about my meeting with Helen Drew today. It wasn't possible to judge Helen Drew's character based on one or two incidents, more time was needed for observation. Just like Ivy Nash, who appeared filial in front of her but was gentle as water before Lucas, yet displayed arrogance before the staff. Understood, madam, Jack Wilson nodded. Noticing a car pulling into the driveway, he added, Madam, the young master has returned. Sophia Carter tucked the envelope into her handbag. Jack Wilson, you may go home now. Today's events must not be disclosed to Lucas Carter. In the past, she understood that he did everything for her and because of his own background. But there were some things that, though she wanted to say, she couldn't bring herself to voice. Lucas, if I could do it all over again, I would rather say nothing to you. I don't want you to live in hatred every day. Auntie, I brought your favorite dessert. Before the person even appeared, a sweet, coquettish voice echoed from behind. Sophia Carter masked the disdain in her eyes, replacing it with a gentle smile as she stood up to greet Ivy Nash entering the living room. Ivy Nash beamed, Auntie, I specially picked the mint flavor you love the most. Saying this, Ivy Nash quickly placed the bag on the table and opened a small box inside. Try a bite, Auntie. This just came fresh out of the oven. Mom, can we eat now? Lucas Carter entered the living room, noticing Ivy Nash eagerly trying to hand the dessert to Sophia Carter. He couldn't help but interrupt. All right, we've been waiting for you. Ivy, join us for dinner too, Sophia Carter said with a sigh of relief. Ivy Nash's enthusiasm always left her feeling awkward. While Sophia did enjoy sweets, she preferred them after meals, not before. Every time Ivy Nash brought desserts before dinner, Sophia felt too polite to refuse and didn't know how to tactfully decline. Ivy Nash, visibly disappointed, set the dessert down on the table. Upon hearing Sophia invite her to dinner, her face lit up with a radiant smile. Yes, of course. Chapter 28, Do you know that man? Ethan, I love this park. When we grow old, can we come here often for walks? Ethan Young pulled over by the curb and slowly rolled down the window. In front of him stood the old house he and Helen Drew once shared. The nearby park held countless memories of the two of them. Ethan Young glanced at the fountain to his left, as if seeing the scene of him and Helen Drew chatting there once again. Ethan, let's build a small fountain in our garden in the future, okay? Ethan, after work, I always want to sit here for a while. It feels like all the day's fatigue just melts away. Ethan, let's come here every day for walks in the future. When we grow old, we can sit on the benches and watch the children play. A bitter smile appeared on Ethan Young's face. Helen, can we ever go back to how things were? Ethan leaned wearily against the driver's seat. Helen, do you know what I'm striving for now? I'm trying to prove to you that I'm more suitable for you than Lucas Carter. I know that only by surpassing Lucas Carter can I uncover his secrets and prove that he never truly loved you. Helen, I never thought that our 4 years together couldn't withstand 3 years apart. If I could choose again, I would rather have stayed back then, to fight alongside you. Even if my father wanted to harm you, I would have stood up to protect you, instead of choosing another way to safeguard you or prove myself. Ugh, let go, ugh. The faint, broken cries reached Ethan Young's ears. You all, ugh, let go. Ethan Young turned his head and saw, on a small path to the right, 3 men in black shirts dragging a woman toward a van. Around her ankle was a platinum anklet, it was Helen Drew. Ethan Young couldn't be mistaken, he couldn't forget. That was the anklet he had personally picked out years ago at the mall when courting Helen Drew. He knew Helen loved platinum jewelry, so he had chosen a design with 2 intertwined leaves. At the time, he had joked that the 2 leaves symbolized him and Helen, forever entwined, never to part. Seeing Helen Drew about to be shoved into the van, Ethan Young quickly opened his car door and dashed forward. Let her go. Helen, don't be afraid. I'm here to save you. Don't be scared. It was only 100 meters, but why did it feel so long today? As he was about to reach them, another person in the van suddenly turned the wheel sharply. Without even bothering to close the door, the driver sped off. In that instant, the abrupt turn's momentum flung the 3 men in black and Helen Drew, who were near the van door, inside. Helen! Ethan Young desperately roared at the truck speeding ahead, Helen! Ethan Young turned around, then changed direction, chasing after the truck that had just driven away. With his other hand, he activated his Bluetooth headset. Adam Hayes, put the company work on hold. Send someone to find me a white truck with the license plate XR11111. Ethan Young pressed his lips tightly together, a fierce glint flashing in his eyes. Investigate who owns this truck. No one is allowed to harm Helen Drew. If even a single hair on her head is out of place, I'll make them all pay with their lives. Ethan, is it Ethan? Helen Drew, dragged into the truck, slammed her arm hard against the window. Ah! Helen Drew inhaled sharply, trying to sit up but realized her left arm was completely powerless. She could only use her right hand to prop herself up. "President Quinn, is this your idea of inviting me to dinner?" Helen Drew coldly stared at President Quinn, who was driving. "Helen Drew, that man just now, do you know him? Ethan Young. How does he have a connection with Helen Drew?" If I hadn't spotted Ethan Young in time and quickly jumped into the driver's seat to turn the car around, I might have been caught by him on the spot. No, under no circumstances can Ethan Young find out I kidnapped Helen Drew. The forces behind Ethan Young are not something I can afford to offend. Not to mention his commander, even just his cousin who's a judge is someone I wouldn't dare cross. He also has a lot of evidence against me in his hands. Any one piece of it could land me in prison for 7 or 8 years. Helen Drew turned her head away and saw the 3 men scrambling to get up. One near the door quickly slammed it shut. The other 2 glared at her before heading to the back seats. "Whether or not I know him is none of your concern, President Quinn." It was clear he was kidnapping her. She had hidden her identity from everyone, and no one knew who she truly was. Moreover, she had been living discreetly. His kidnapping must have something to do with Lucas Carter. But didn't it seem like his relationship with Lucas Carter wasn't bad? "If you won't say, do you think I can't find out?" President Quinn sneered, accelerating the car toward the outskirts. Helen Drew's face turned cold as she gazed at the scenery outside the window. She could hide her identity and change her life, but she couldn't erase the 4 years she had spent by Ethan Young's side. President Quinn seemed somewhat wary of Ethan Young. Could it be because he had just returned from the military? And recently, there had been news of a rising company, whose young and talented CEO also happened to have the last name Young. Could it be Ethan Young? Helen Drew shook her head. What was she even thinking? If it really were Ethan Young, why would he have come to this city with her years ago, deciding to start over, only to eventually enlist in the military without doing anything? Helen Drew furrowed her brows, lost in thought. Chapter 29, In his eyes, I do not exist. "Auntie, this is your favorite dumpling." Ivy Nash picked up the dumpling in front of her and placed it into Sophia Carter's bowl, glancing at Lucas Carter. Her heart was brimming with happiness. She wished that every evening could be like this, sharing meals together, feeling like a family. If only Helen Drew never appeared. How wonderful that would be. Over the years, all of Lucas Carter's secretaries were personally chosen by her, and none were better than her. The most infuriating thing was that 3 years ago, while she was away on a business trip, Helen Drew applied for the position. By the time she returned to the company, before she could even express her anger, someone quietly told her that it was Lucas Carter himself who had personally appointed Helen Drew. Ivy Nash picked up a piece of braised pork and bit into it fiercely, as if she were biting into Helen Drew herself. Helen Drew was younger, prettier, and smarter than her. Every task assigned to her was completed on time. Over the past 3 years, Ivy had tried to make things difficult for Helen Drew, but the opportunities to do so hadn't even reached 10 times. Clutching the chopsticks tightly in her hands, Ivy felt an overwhelming urge to strangle Helen Drew. "Ivy, try the 3 delicacies soup that Aunt Carter just learned to make," Sophia Carter said, noticing Ivy Nash staring intently at her bowl of rice. Unable to hold back, she spoke up, "Make sure to taste it thoroughly and share your feedback with Aunt Carter." Sophia Carter gave a quick glance to Aunt Carter, who stood nearby, signaling her to serve the soup to Ivy Nash. With a gentle and kind smile, Aunt Carter said warmly, "Mrs. Nash, please try this soup I just learned to make and share your thoughts with me." At times, Aunt Carter couldn't understand Sophia Carter's behavior. Every time Ivy Nash came to the Carter household for a meal, Sophia Carter would greet her warmly with a cheerful smile. Yet, after Ivy Nash left, Sophia would always ask Aunt Carter to take all the snacks and gifts Ivy brought back home. Aunt Carter couldn't figure out whether Sophia Carter liked or disliked Ivy Nash. Ivy Nash quickly put down her chopsticks and flashed a bright smile. Aunt Carter, how could I trouble you? Let me do it myself. Saying this, she swiftly grabbed the ladle from Aunt Carter's hand and served herself some soup. Rying. The sudden ringing of a phone on the dining table made Ivy Nash uneasy. Placing the bowl of 3 delicacies soup full in front of her, under Sophia Carter's gentle gaze and Aunt Carter's expectant look, she picked up the spoon and began sipping the soup. At the same time, Lucas Carter, hearing his phone ring, picked it up and walked out of the room. God knows how much Ivy Nash wanted to throw the spoon in her hand and rush out to eavesdrop on who was calling Lucas Carter. Was it Helen Drew? Was it Helen Drew calling to ask him out again? Did she think Ivy hadn't assigned enough work to him today? Ivy Nash lowered her head and drank the soup in big gulps. If not for maintaining her image in front of Sophia Carter, she might have picked up the bowl and drained it all in one go. Ivy, how does it taste? Sophia Carter glanced at Lucas Carter, who was stepping out to take a phone call, and noticed Ivy Nash fidgeting uneasily. She spoke up, Ivy, give Mother Carter some feedback. Ivy Nash set her spoon down, staring blankly at the empty bowl. Her cheeks flushed as she hesitated, unsure of how to respond. Mother Carter, it's very delicious. She glanced at Lucas Carter, unable to stop herself from wanting to stand up. Sophia Carter was about to say something when she noticed Lucas Carter walking toward her with a cold expression. Her heart skipped a beat. Had someone told him about her meeting with Helen Drew that afternoon? Sophia Carter placed her chopsticks down and smiled gracefully. Lucas, what's the matter? Mother, President Quinn has some business to discuss with me. I'll step out for a bit, you all continue. Lucas Carter grabbed the car keys from the table, not sparing Ivy Nash even a glance, and turned to leave. Ivy Nash quickly stood up. Lucas, I've finished eating. Let me go with you. President Quinn. What could he want with Lucas? Years ago, she had gone to great lengths to ensure the boss abandoned President Quinn, allowing Lucas Carter to become his trusted confidant. Rumor had it that the Quinn Corporation was nearing bankruptcy. If it weren't for her efforts to block the news, who knows if the boss would have helped him. No need. Stay home and keep Mother company. Lucas Carter strode toward the garage, gripping the car keys tightly in his right hand. Ivy Nash froze, intending to chase after him, but his figure had already disappeared from the living room. She sighed and slumped back into her chair, a bitter smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Auntie, why is it that he never sees me? Lucas Carter, what do I have to do for you to notice me? A flash of ruthlessness flickered in Ivy Nash's eyes. Helen Drew, you forced me to this point. This is all your fault. Sophia Carter, with an emotionless face, raised the glass of red wine in front of her. Ivy, I've arranged to meet some friends for a card game. Who was she? She was merely someone that man had placed by his side to monitor him. Did she think Lucas would fall in love with her? Ivy Nash concealed the sorrow in her eyes, forcing a reluctant smile, trying to make herself appear less pitiful. Madam, I have some matters to attend to. Please excuse me. Madam, why don't you help Mrs. Nash? Aunt Carter couldn't help but ask as she saw Ivy Nash struggling to leave. Sophia Carter stood up and headed upstairs. Aunt Carter, don't ask about things you shouldn't know. She pointed at the plate of pastries on the table. The pastries Ivy Nash brought over, take them home for your late-night snack. Chapter 30, He has been conquered by her. Helen Drew calmly observed the situation before her. She knew that even if she had learned karate, she wouldn't be able to take on these 4 men, let alone the fact that she had never studied it. Helen Drew bit her lip tightly and looked around with composure, noticing that this was an old, shabby little house. Inside the room, there were only 2 chairs. She was sitting on one, while the other was being crushed under the foot of General Manager Quinn Tai. What kind of place did you idiots find? I told you to pick somewhere secluded, and while this place is indeed isolated, couldn't you at least find somewhere with proper chairs to sit on? General Manager Quinn Tai puffed on his cigarette, shouting at the group of lackeys behind him. Go check if there's any other place nearby. He angrily kicked the chair under his foot twice, pacing back and forth in the small, dilapidated house. Boss, one of the lackeys timidly spoke up, we've already searched everywhere. This is the only relatively secluded place. And as for the chair, the lackey nervously glanced at the chair that had been kicked over by Quinn Tai before continuing, the chair is right under your foot. Quinn Tai turned around and punched the man squarely in the face, yelling furiously, you call this a chair? This thing? You think anyone can sit on this? My subordinates are all useless. You still don't know how to go out and find me a proper chair. Helen Drew glanced over and let out a mocking laugh. General Manager Quinn Tai, it's already past dinner time. I suppose you're not planning to invite me for dinner, are you? Did Quinn Tai kidnap her because of Lucas Carter? Why was he so tense when he saw Ethan Young earlier? Could it be that he was afraid of Ethan Young? Helen Drew smirked derisively. Ethan Young was just a recently discharged soldier, while Quinn Tai was the CEO of the Quinn Corporation. How could someone like him fear a mere soldier with no power or influence? Quinn Tai tossed away his cigarette butt and shrugged. Miss Drew, my apologies for making you go hungry. As long as your boyfriend comes to pick you up quickly, I think you'll still make it in time for a late-night snack with him. He slipped his hands into his pockets and felt his phone, his lips curling into a sly smile. He had just called Lucas Carter earlier, and to his surprise, the man who usually played around everywhere seemed serious this time. Initially, he had only intended to test the waters. If Helen Drew was just another fling for Lucas Carter, he would have let her go. But Lucas Carter's anxious tone on the phone didn't sound like he was pretending. Moreover, Lucas didn't even let him finish his sentence before urgently agreeing to come right away. It seemed Helen Drew had completely captured Lucas Carter's heart. Helen Drew paused for a moment, a warm feeling rising in her heart. Indeed, he really loved her and cared for her. President Quinn, are you kidnapping me? Miss Drew, don't misunderstand. I'm merely inviting you here for a chat. President Quinn moved closer to Helen Drew, carefully observing her beautiful face, alluring eyes, and rosy lips. President Quinn swallowed hard. No wonder Lucas Carter was so captivated by her. A woman this stunning, who wouldn't want to cherish her? He hadn't paid much attention to Helen Drew before, but now he realized she exuded an innate cold elegance and nobility, making him feel slightly uneasy. Helen Drew raised an eyebrow. Misunderstanding? Then, President Quinn, care to explain why you had my hands tied? She glanced behind her, then cast a cold gaze at President Quinn. Well, you see, this place is so desolate. I was afraid you might wander off. If President Carter arrives and doesn't find you, wouldn't that be my fault? President Quinn chuckled awkwardly, his face plastered with a forced smile. His eyes gleamed with cunning as he glanced at the subordinates behind him. What are you standing there for? Go outside and check if President Carter has arrived yet. Yes. The three subordinates nodded hastily and rushed out the door, jostling and pushing each other. Hey, let me go first. Move over a bit. Helen Drew sighed inwardly. Were these really gang members? They seemed far from professional, more like characters from a comedy. For some reason, upon hearing that Lucas Carter was coming, Helen Drew didn't feel scared. Instead, she felt a sense of reassurance. The questions she had been pondering for months now seemed to have an answer.